To order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Present.
Vice Chair Gonzalez. Present. Beckley. Busey.
Here.
Clardy. Fierro. Jatan.
Here.
Schofield.
Here.
Swanson.
Here.
A quorum is present. The chair lays out House Bill 160 and recognizes Representative Wiener to explain the bill.
Chair Kane, Vice Chair Gonzalez, other members of the House Elections Committee, thank you for the opportunity to present House Bill 160 today. This is a very simple piece of legislation that simply adds identification cards from public institutions of higher education to the list of acceptable forms of identification for voting in the state of Texas. Here in Texas, young voters especially face obstacles towards keeping or having a correct form of ID when going to vote. We are seeing folks delay getting their driver's licenses, and so many students do not have a state-issued ID. In addition, many folks in college don't carry their state-issued ID if they have it with them on a regular basis when they're on campus. They take a bus to the campus, they walk, they don't carry their driver's license with them, but they do carry their student ID because their student ID often has their meal card on it, often swipes them into buildings. I have personally witnessed students at the university in my district, Texas State University, be turned away from voting because they had forgot to bring their driver's license that day. Sometimes it's during early voting, they have a chance to come back, but sometimes it's on election day. And they end up not having an opportunity or casting a provisional ballot that they may or may not cure in the required time. So members, we already have 7 forms of state-issued identification that we allow for voting: driver's license, military ID, passport, citizenship certificate, election identification certificate, handgun license, and personal identification cards. I think it makes sense to add another form of state-issued ID. We did put some parameters around this to make it consistent with other forms of state-issued ID in Texas. This would only allow a student ID card, again, from a public institution of higher education, to be used provided that that identification card contains a photograph, full legal name, and an expiration date. So members, this would just put these student identification cards on par with other forms of state-issued identification and make it simpler for students at our institutions of higher education to vote securely. And the committee substitute for this legislation is simply a legislative council draft. Members, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I respectfully request my right to close.
You got it. Thank you, members. Before we can go to questions, please let the record reflect that Representative Fierro and Representative Beckley are now present. Members, any questions for the author? All right, we'll bring you back up.
Thanks.
Also, by the way, we'll be closing testimony at 7:30 p.m. So if you haven't already, please go register on the kiosks before 7:30 p.m. Chair now calls Andrew Eller. Good evening. I choose Andrew Eller here on behalf of yourself, and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct. Andrew Eller, on behalf of myself, and I am against the bill. As an election judge in Bell County, I'm very familiar with the photo ID requirements in the polling location. And when you add a university ID to the list, which is actually not a government-issued ID, just about anybody can get that just by enrolling in a university. I mean, you think about it, we have out-of-state students that come in that can get one. We have people here legally from other countries. We have people illegally here from other countries, and there are multiple opportunities for fraud with that. So now they've got an ID. They just simply have to register, check the box that they're a citizen. They may not even actually live in the state of Texas, but they're here for school, and then they'll go ahead and use that for voting. It really is just a system that would be ripe with fraud, and it doesn't fit. The other thing I'd like to point out is, as an election judge, I've seen examples of people coming in from other states. They've moved here. For instance, I had a resident, a doctor, who had moved in, and he came in, and he had a state driver's license from out of state, but he had only been here about 2 months. He happened to register in time to vote. He came in. That was his only ID. And, that would fit. Well, I couldn't allow him to vote vote unless he used the reasonable impediment. I said, this is not a state-issued ID from the state of Texas. You can't use it. But he did have a utility bill that he could use, and we used the reasonable impediment. That is what can be used for those who are legally registered to vote in the state of Texas. Any other ID is just bad news all around. So I urge you to vote against this bill and not pass it out of committee.
Sir.
What questions?
Thank you. Thanks. Please let the record show that Representative Clardy is present. Turnout calls Steph Gomez. All right, I've got you as Stephanie Gomez. You're here on behalf of Common Cause Texas, and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
Yep.
Please proceed.
Yep. So my name is Stephanie Gomez. I'm here to register my support for House Bill 160 on behalf of Common Cause Texas and our over 50,000 members across Texas. So young Texans are the future of our state and our democracy. And despite all of the systemic and cultural hurdles that young Texans have to overcome in order to participate in our democracy, Texas youth are absolutely leading our state in political participation and voter turnout. In 2020, our state saw record-breaking youth turnout. By the end of the 2020 early voting period, 1.3 million voters under the age of 30 had cast a ballot. This should be a point of pride for the state of Texas, but it certainly doesn't seem to be. Young Texans face a lot of unique barriers to voting, including the fact that Texas is one of only 7 states where a student ID is not an acceptable form of voter identification. It is time that we begin addressing the structural barriers that prevent young Texans from participating fully in our democratic processes, and House Bill 160 is a great first step to take. There are already safeguards in place that would make it that if a person was not eligible to vote in Texas, they would, whether or not a voter ID that is useful for people who are eligible to vote to Texas, it wouldn't make a difference for these claims of voter fraud that are not supported in any way. Young Texans are voting, and young Texans have been coming to the Capitol to have their voices heard, and this is something that they have been advocating for quite some time now. I urge you to vote in favor of House Bill 160.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any questions for this witness? Chair recognizes Representative Beckley.
Thank you. So it has been a little bit some time since I've had to get a student ID. So could you tell me what the process is on, because I think you have to go through several steps before you can get your student ID.
Yeah, so to get a student ID, you have to be a student at a university. So I was at the University of Houston Go Cougs not that long ago. And it was, you're issued an ID through the state, but like when people are coming up here and saying that by allowing eligible Texans who are already eligible to vote to use their student ID to vote, that it's going to make it easier for fraud, that doesn't make sense because of those people who are ineligible because of like being non-citizens or not residents in Texas already can't register to vote in Texas. So, but yeah, you get the ID through your school.
And it has your picture. Okay, has your picture on it? Does it have an address? What else does it have on it?
It does not have an address. So of course, I only went to the University of Houston. So mine had my name and my photo and like my student ID. But like this bill would make sure that it has all of the same main components that are required for like any photo ID used for voter identification.
And then how is it different from a concealed handgun license?
I don't have a concealed handgun license, so I don't know, but
because those are a form of ID that
and it's
so how
ridiculous.
is that different?
It's not. The point of it is to just confirm the face of the voter, right? So if the point is to just, it can very much fulfill that requirement.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions for this witness? Thank you, Ms. Gomez. Chair now calls David Fuentes. Good evening, Ms. Fuentes. I've got you as David Fuentes here on behalf of yourself, and you were for this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please proceed.
All right. Good evening, members of the Elections Committee, Chairman Kane, Vice Chair Gonzalez. My name is David Fuentes. I'm a student at St. Edward's University, school worker, and also a proud third-time voter. I'd like to begin by highlighting a fact, and that is that Texas is suffering from low turnout. We ranked 45th in the 2020 general election. It so happens that it's people my age, 18 through 24 range, that are having lower turnout records. And so I'm here to present my support for House Bill 160. I speak on behalf of many college students in saying that we face unique obstacles when it comes to voting. We are new voters. A lot of the time, we're not familiar with the laws. You know, the laws change varying from state to state. And so some states allow using student ID as a valid form of voter ID. Some states don't. Unfortunately, sometimes we show up to the polling locations and aren't informed, and we get rejected at the ballot. And when it's your first time, second time voting, it's a great experience. You're practicing your right, and so you're left with disappointment when you're rejected at the ballot box. As it was stated before, there are other states that accept student ID as valid forms of voter ID. Now, you can say that there's other forms that we could use for voter ID, and besides just driver license, which is the most common. But again, we're college students. We don't have this documentation necessarily with us. I personally keep it at my parents' house because it's a place where it's safe, where I know where it is. And so we don't always have this physical access to other documentation that we can use. And so if we don't, let's say we lose our driver's license close to an election day, we don't have time to get a new one, we don't get to practice our right. Therefore, I ask that the committee proceeds with House Bill 160, as I believe it would lower the disenfranchisement of people my age. University IDs are carried reliably by students. We need them for meal plan. We need to get inside buildings to access campus resources. And many public institutions already hold election polling centers. So it just makes the process easier and make it more inclusive. With that, I'd like to end that, if the goal of voter ID laws is to protect the integrity of our elections, then we should ensure that we're not disenfranchising people in the process. And that does happen with uninformed voters, especially voters who believe they can vote with their student ID. I think this bill would encourage voter participation and increase accessibility to the ballot box. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Members, any questions? None? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair now calls Brandon Bradley. Howdy, sir. Here it shows me as you as Brandon Bradley. Here on behalf of the University Democrats and yourself, and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please
Yes.
proceed.
All right. I'd like to thank the committee for allowing us to testify on this legislation. And I'd like to first, as someone who has had the fortune in the 2020 election to serve as an election worker, to correct a bit of misinformation that you heard earlier in this public testimony, which is that as someone who sat at that terminal and verified people's photo identification, there are systems in place that would ensure that those that have a student ID but are, say, international students or out-of-state students who haven't registered to vote would not be able to vote even with a student ID. This would not in any way affect the ability of non-state residents, people that hadn't registered to vote. So just putting that out of the way. Why are student IDs so important for people to vote? Well, you heard it here just a moment ago that for many students, a lot of the cures for reasonable impediments aren't possessed at their residence because they live on dorms, because they keep a lot of their those types of documents with their parents. For a whole host of reasons, these people, my friends, don't have the cures to the reasonable impediment forms. And so why then should we take the extra step to ensure that they are able to vote? These universities across the state are opportunities, are places where people come from all over to discuss the role and the nature of government, who become engaged for the first time in their state, in their community. And being denied access to their vote because they don't have a driver's license or a photo identification. For many students like myself with disabilities that aren't able to get a driver's license, I have a state ID because I was eager and excited to vote and did all the preparatory work. But as someone who's done lots of get out the vote work and things like that, I know that that's not the case for all students. And we have lots of enthusiasm, people ready and willing and eager to vote, but there are not available means often for students to have those cures, and this would provide that mechanism without compromising the integrity of the elections. So I thank you for your time.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Appreciate it.
Chair now calls Ana Fuentes. All right, I've got you as Ana Fuentes. You're here on behalf of yourself and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Good evening, Chairman Kane, Vice Chair Gonzalez, House Election Committee members. My name is Ana Fuentes, and I'm a first-year student at the University of Texas at Austin, and I am testifying today in favor of House Bill 160. I was a first-time voter during the 2020 general election, and the day that I was able to register to vote was a day that I had anticipated for a very long time. I know I am not the only person that longs for a day in which they get to register to vote and become civically engaged. However, there are instances in which young voters have been turned away from voting due to the lack of a government-issued identification card. This bill would put an end to this barrier. Young voters face enough obstacles when it comes to voting as it is. It is also important to note the obstacles that one faces when attempting to obtain a government-issued ID. There are many reasons and factors that go into why students do not obtain one. The state election code currently does not allow the utilization of student identification cards as a form of voting. Young people from the age of 18 to 24 are the most powerful voting bloc within the state of Texas. However, this age group is most likely to sit out on election day. This should not be the case. Students should not be discouraged at the thought of voting. Students deserve to have their voices heard at the ballot box, and we should be facilitating that gap between students and voting. Why is it that a Texas handgun license is a valid form of identification, but a student identification card is not? As a college student myself, I carry my student identification card with me at all times as any other college student. With the usage of student identification cards, voting will become more accessible to students within higher education institutions. Not only that, but with accepting student IDs as a valid form of identification, we'll be able to continue to uphold election integrity as well. We currently have one of the lowest voting turnout rates in the country. That is why I'm in favor of this bill. Young voters should not have to see voting as an arduous process. Legislation affects young voters more than anyone, and that is why it is imperative to facilitate voting procedures for this specific demographic. Thank you.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Ms. Fuentes. Chair now calls Diana Chambliss. Diana Chambliss. Chair now calls Robert Green. Good evening, Mr. Green. I've got you as Robert Green, here on behalf of the Travis County Republican Party Election Integrity Committee and yourself, and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please proceed.
There's a couple of items that I'd like to look at on here. With a student ID card, that does not tie you to any type of address. And in order to register to vote, you've got to give them a residence address. When people come in from out of state to universities and everything, they don't really have a permanent address in the state. They may have a P.O. box. We've already talked about P.O. boxes, but with the exception that sometimes students who are in the state anyway may establish a temporary residence. What I was looking at on here is this would permit a situation where you could have a student ID that was expired up to 4 years. This person may have been to school and gone long since and be out of state, be out of the country. We just don't know. We want to be able to ensure, obviously, that the individual is a United States citizen and is a resident of the county in which they are voting. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Members, any questions? None. Thank you. Okay. Representative Beckley's recognized.
Sorry, thank you very much. So I got to go look at my passport, but I'm pretty sure my passport does not have my address on it either. Yet
it does.
I don't think it does.
It doesn't?
No, it does
Doesn't have an
not.
address on it?
No, it does not. And yet it's a form.
It's a government issue.
Yeah, it's a government issued ID. So I think that is not a viable reason not to use the student IDs. And it's pretty hard to get a student ID. I'm just going to point that out that
Well, it's easy to get an ID card as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go to DPS and it's very.
Have you tried to go to DPS lately? 6 months wait.
Well, I don't
Sorry,
know.
no, I don't think so. I'm sorry. That's a whole nother issue. I do understand. That's a whole nother issue. It's 6 months wait in my district, so no, that's not that easy
I
to
know,
do.
long
That-
way.
It is a long way,
Get 'em
so
every
yeah.
day.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thanks, sir. Turn to call is Emily Eby.
This time it is good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah.
All right, Emily, I'll get you. Emily Eby, here on behalf of the Texas Civil Rights Project, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
3 for 3.
Go for it.
I'm testifying for HB 160 because the youth vote matters to Texas. In the last 4 years, 70% of people between the age of 18 and 29 have talked to their friends about issues on the ballot. Over half of those young people actively work to convince other young people to vote. Between 2016 and 2020, the youth vote in Texas grew more than 600%. Young people represented 14% of the total vote share in Texas last November, and that number's only growing. Thousands of young people correctly choose Texas as their home for college. Those students plug into Texas political parties on both sides, candidates, ballot propositions, working tirelessly to create the Texas they wish to see. They are Texans. They chose it. More than I chose it as a baby, but I absolutely would choose it, let me be clear. Unfortunately, when many of those students show up to vote, they find that they have to fill out a reasonable impediment declaration simply because their driver's license was issued in a different state. Between lack of transportation, demanding class schedules, and jobs to make ends meet, college students have some of the highest barriers to getting a DPS-issued ID. Student IDs, as we've heard, are no less secure than any DPS-issued ID on the approved list. One must be enrolled in a college to obtain a student ID. Students must show identification in order to enroll or to receive a student ID. By allowing Texans to vote with their student IDs, HB 160 would affirm that college students who make their homes here are Texans, and this bill would help nurture a lifelong habit of civic engagement in the next generation of our state. I also just want to note that driver's licenses and other forms of ID can also be expired up to 4 years and still be valid. So it's just as likely that someone with a Texas driver's license has moved away and come back to vote that it is as a student ID. For these reasons, we'd ask you to support the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Chair recognizes Representative Beckley.
So another form of ID that we use is the military IDs. Do those have addresses? I don't know. Like, I've never seen it.
I don't know, but I could text my brother and find out.
Just a question, because that seems to be the big concern.
Yeah, I would guess that they don't because they probably move around
Because they move
a lot
around.
and wouldn't be
I don't know. I don't know what the issue looks like.
I don't either, but I'll find out. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Chair now calls Bill Sargent. All right, I got you. It's Bill Sargent here on behalf of yourself, and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
And if you'll give me 1 second, I would like to give this to you. I would like it back, please.
Well,
But that is a military ID for 20 years service.
you may proceed, sir.
I oppose this measure. The only IDs that are and should be acceptable are those that are issued by governmental agencies such as DPS, which issues TDLs, identification cards, handgun licenses, and Texas election IDs, which are free, and for the federal government, which issues passports, military IDs, Veterans Administration IDs, and certificates of naturalization. Schools, even though they are public institutions, don't go through the vetting process that DPS and the federal government does, especially when it comes to a person who is whether a person's a U.S. citizen. For example, there are foreign nationals who are students in our country. They can get a student ID and since nobody checks to see if a person is actually a U.S. citizen anymore, there is a distinct possibility that a non-citizen student could be allowed to vote. Stranger things have happened. Claiming that there are not instances where non-citizens vote is patently untrue. I can tell you that in Galveston County, we had a person who voted in five separate elections before we discovered that they were not a U.S. citizen. So that does happen. Finally, a voter forgetting to bring a driver's license or other acceptable form of ID should not be an excuse for adding an additional form of ID. You know, there comes a point where people need to take responsibility for their own actions. We shouldn't spoon feed everybody. If you don't bring your ID to a polling place and you have one, then by golly, you got to go home and get it. That's what we've done for regular voters, is not just students. It applies to everybody. Take responsibility and do what you're supposed to do and be prepared when you come to vote. That's my story.
Any questions? Chair recognizes Representative Clardy.
I was just going to ask Mr. Sargent if that was his story and if he's sticking with it.
Yes, sir, I am.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent.
Thank you.
Chair now calls Patricia Zavala.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Patricia Zavala, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for Jolt Action. I'm here to testify for HB 160. We're a statewide civic engagement organization. We have chapters all around the state, high school and colleges in El Paso, Austin, Georgetown, San Marcos, San Antonio, Arlington, Denton, Fort Worth, Dallas, Commerce, Houston, Prairie View, Tyler, Nacogdoches, College Station, and Edinburgh. We register people to vote. We get them out to the polls. We educate them about what's on the ballot. Over the years, we've noticed a certain trend where people are getting younger and younger in terms of their involvement in politics, because we have these mobile devices where the entire world is at their fingertips, so they care more and more about what's going on in the world. But then there's kind of a paradox, because people between the ages of 14 to 25 are actually the lowest voting bloc that we see, the lowest voting turnout. So where's that contradiction? People are getting really actively involved. We have a 14-year-old member who became an environmental activist at just the age of 12. But we're also seeing tons of people that aren't turning out to vote. There are a lot of obstacles to turn out to vote, including transportation. A lot of people don't have transportation. When you turn 18 or 16, you don't automatically get a driver's license. Like the witness before me, not everybody can get a driver's license. Not everybody gets a car when they turn 16. Not everybody can make it to the DPS. A lot of people don't have access to transportation, or they don't even have the money to pay to get a driver's license. There's a lot of confusion about the IDs. They don't know what kind of IDs they need to bring to the voting polls. And while we are a statewide organization, we can't educate all of the voters on what they need in order to get out there. So people are just generally confused. I want to show you this UT ID for one of our students that's here with us tonight. It does have your name and a picture ID. This is not intended to validate your eligibility to vote. It's just to confirm who you are, who you say you are, that you are who you say you are. So the way that you determine eligibility to vote is you register to vote with the Secretary of State, and they determine that, and then you get added to the voters' rolls. So when you go to the polls to vote, they just double check and make sure that you are who you say you are. So just to correct what the previous gentleman said before me, this isn't used to validate your eligibility to vote. And I completely understand that concern, but that's not the purpose of this. This is basically a key for a lot of students to get into all of the things that they need: cafeteria, library, gym, rec center. A student is always going to have this on them. So a student isn't always going to have a driver's license or a military ID or a handgun license. This is something that is basically a necessity for all students, and so it's going to be certain that they're going to have it on them when they go to the polls. So by allowing students to be able to vote with this will be able to increase voter participation. And I'm just wondering, if somebody can use a concealed handgun license, then why can't we use this voter ID, student ID? It's a very simple, straightforward concept. It's a government-issued ID, and we would expand it from 7 to 8 valid forms of ID. So I encourage you to pass HB 160.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Real quick, just to make sure I keep the record clear, just a yes or no. Your name is Patricia Zavala. You're here on behalf of Jolt Action and yourself, and you were for the bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Beckley.
So I know that, and I want to thank his for his service. That it did, by the way, it did not have an address on there. So I do remember U.S. military being deported that had served, people who had served. So I don't think they're. Are you aware of those stories too? So I don't think that necessarily is verifying whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. You can serve in the military and not be a citizen.
Correct. Yeah, that's accurate.
That's not verifying your citizenship, just because a military ID does not verify your citizenship. But I do thank everybody for their service. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Clardy.
Thank you, Chairman Kane. And Ms. Zavala, thank you for your testimony, for being back with us tonight. It's been a couple, 3 weeks since you've, I think, been in the committee.
Yes.
So I pulled out, I've got a state rep card the DPS gives us, and I think it has an embedded chip that is used for security reasons, whatever. I'm looking at my Texas driver's license, which I'm pleased to say has not expired. And then it's got the barcode on the back, and I think at some level, if it's scanned, it'll pop up with a thumbprint or other identification. Does the card that you're holding from the University of Texas, from one of your colleagues here tonight, does it have any kind of security feature like that? I think it probably has something that you swipe, like a credit card, to get into the cafeteria, get into the rec center, has something, some secured access.
Yes, it appears so. So there's this metal strip on the back. So I assume that by swiping this, they're able to pull up the records and verify that this person is who they say they are, which I imagine would be connected to their registration forms and their social security number, everything that they did in order to get registered. Not necessarily social, but yes, it does have some sort of verification and a barcode.
And the address is provided for the student, and I'm not asking you to read that into the record, but does it give a, and I don't know, will students use their home address and or will they use their dorm address, or will they use an apartment address? What's used in the?
Yeah, so it's up to the student to decide where they want to register to vote. If they want to register to vote in their hometown, they can do that, and then they can vote by mail via vote by mail. But if they want to register on their campus address or in their dorm or their student housing, they can register in that district as well. So in that case, when they go to register to vote, like on campus or something, then it would align, where they're registered to vote and where they're living. But if somebody registers to vote in their hometown, then they're going to have to vote by mail or go back home to vote.
I appreciate the point you're making, that the student ID is not used for purposes of confirming registration or citizenship. That's done through the application process through the Secretary of State or voter registrar. I guess I'm conflicted on this a bit, because I doubt that you could get on an airline flight using a student ID. And I doubt that you could get into a bar, not that any college students ever try to go to a bar, but should they go, I doubt that you can get admission into a bar with a student ID, even if it shows your date of birth and has a picture and has your name. I'm not saying that's right. I just think I think that's what the rules would be. So I think there's an authenticity and not that in this day and age, probably any form of identification could be forged, could be duplicated, recreated some level, but there is I think a higher degree of confidence within a state issue, not just because it's a state university, but a true state issued. But again, I do live in a college town, and I do want to encourage participation in the election process by students. I would like to see, I know there's certain things you do where it requires two forms of identification. I think that that would be an entirely appropriate second form of identification. Like sometimes you can bring a utility bill with your voter registration card. There's other things that we can do. So I can see it would be supplemental or complementary, but I'm struggling with. I haven't made a decision on this, Representative Zwiener, but that I'm struggling with that as the exclusive resource upon which we determine identification.
Right. And I really appreciate your thoughtful consideration and that you're trying to wrestle with this. And I think that I completely understand where you're coming from, that you want to look at something, you want it to be verified from the government 100%. And I think that this is done on the back end. So the whole registration process of getting registered to vote, that gets validated and then puts in the system so that when somebody goes to register to vote, it'll show, okay, you're this old, you live at this address, and they can confirm that on the back end. So it's not, I can understand how it's not as explicit on this ID, but I think that we can trust our Secretary of State to do their job.
Let's hope so. They're in the back of the room as we speak. So thank you, Ms. Zavala. Very, very impressive testimony.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Chair now calls Andrea Flores. I've got you as Andrea Flores. You're here on behalf of Move Texas Action Fund and yourself, and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening, committee. My name is Andrea Flores, and I'm the Dallas Advocacy Organizer for Move Texas. Move Texas is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, grassroots organization leading to build power in underrepresented youth communities through civic engagement, leadership development, and issue advocacy. And yeah, sorry, I lost my place. Today, I'm urging the committee to pass HB 160 out of committee. Let me begin by thanking the committee for taking up this issue regarding making student ID a form of voter ID. I would like to speak on how requiring campus polling locations and allowing student ID as an acceptable form of identification for voting ultimately helps build a civic culture that treats young people as equal participants in our democracy, deserving of resources. We know that this is a critical time for young voters to form a lifelong habit of voting because as the research on civic engagement indicates, voting early in life tends to translate into a lifetime of voting. We know this is good because we have a lifetime of responsibilities to care for society, fight for justice, and maintain our democracy. We know this project starts at Texas A&M, a whoop, at University of Texas at Austin, at Baylor, at UTSA, University of Houston, UTRGV, Texas State, and hundreds of other universities, big and small, all over Texas. A state where everything is bigger, so don't leave out the biggest generation in history. Student IDs are given to nearly every college student after providing proof of their identification upon enrollment. They are a convenient and secure option that should be an acceptable form of voter ID. Texas is one out of only 7 states that does not accept student IDs for voting. Not accepting student IDs as an acceptable form of identification for voting is a discriminatory measure that disenfranchises thousands of young people. Choosing to allow ID type over another shapes the electorate and carves it up in a way that is arbitrary unless we actually believe as a state that young voters are worthless. I hope we don't stand for that. Move Texas is working to fundamentally change the culture of voting by creating lifelong voters that starts in those first few critical elections. The student electorate is rising, and a way policymakers can meet this energy is by making voting accessible and convenient by requiring on-campus polling locations and allowing student IDs as a valid form of voter identification. Voting isn't a privilege afforded to a handful of citizens. It is a right of every eligible person and student. Lawmakers should be celebrating and urging that these bills be passed, rather than spending time and resources into making it harder for young people to vote in Texas. These bills will help to increase voter turnout and civic participation, which is good for democracy, not just one party. I have my student ID right here, and 2020 is just around the corner. Let's make it so students show pride while showing pride for democracy. Pass HB 160. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you. Members, any questions? Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was a little surprised Representative Beckley wasn't whooping with you. Yeah. All right, chair now calls Alexandra Evans.
Hi there, committee members. My name is Alexandra Evans. I'm a student at UT Austin, and I'm pretty involved in campus get out the vote efforts, and I'm in favor of HB 160. I'm testifying as myself. I think we all know that Texas voter laws are pretty convoluted. Whether you'd like to admit that or not, it's true. Students come to campus with little to no civic education. Other students are then tasked with hours and hours of voter registration and education, and we do the best we can with as little as possible, and we do a good job. However, every election day and early voting, I encounter the same thing. A student is trying to engage in their civic duty, but they are turned away because they don't have the proper identification. And the fact is that they just didn't know. And that is not their failure. What it reflects is a negligence by the state in ensuring that people can accessibly and easily participate in their own democracy. The opposition to this bill has been upset that students move here, make home here, and ultimately decide to vote here. But I don't know who has enrolled in a university recently, but they require a significant amount of information, and it is far, far more than I needed to get my driver's license or an ID in the state of Texas. While the information is not necessarily on the physical ID card, it is very much privy to receiving it. My university also makes me verify my address every single semester because they want to send me a lot of mail. And I mean no crudeness, but to suggest that student IDs are readily accessible for fraud is hyperbole. This bill helps students become engaged members of the political process, and it increases their enfranchisement, and I think it would greatly benefit so many for it to move through this committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you, Alexandra. Chair now calls Diana Gomez. And we have got you as Diana Gomez here on behalf of Progress Texas and yourself, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Please proceed.
My name is Diana Gomez. I am for HB 160, and I'm here representing myself in Progress Texas. Our organization advocates for all eligible Texans to have fair and equal access to the ballot box. Every Texan's vote matters, and that includes college students. And to reiterate a point made earlier, voter ID has one purpose: to verify that a person is who they say they are. It does not verify eligibility or residency. I remember how excited I was to vote for the very first time after turning 18, as I'm sure that y'all were too. However, this excitement wears off when a student discovers that what might be their only form of identification is not considered a quote-unquote valid form of ID to exercise their legal right to vote in this state. Students are fired up about politics and want to participate. But when barriers like restrictive voter ID laws stand in their way, they're not able to fully participate in our democratic process. Now, I was a first-generation college student from a low-income background in Hays County, and I went on to serve as an AmeriCorps volunteer in Central Texas for a few years after graduating from UT Austin. My term of service was spent working with students just like me, who were the first in their families to go off to college. Many didn't have money for application fees, college dorm supplies, even less on a car, which meant they didn't have a driver's license. But when they stepped onto those college campuses, they all had valid college IDs. They were all amazing young Texans, just like the thousands of others across the state who deserve to have their voices heard. I ask for this committee's support of HB 160 and to support the use of student IDs as voter IDs. These IDs have photographs, full legal names, and are issued by an accredited institution. They're no less valid and secure than a Texas handgun license, which is considered an acceptable form of ID to vote in Texas. Voting is like a muscle and should be exercised in every election. I'm asking this committee to help encourage our young Texan voters to flex this muscle proudly and often by supporting HB 160. Let's fix this crack in our voting system and galvanize more eligible voters to turn out at the ballot box.
Thanks so much. Members, any questions? None? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair now calls Charlie Bonner. Charlie Bonner. Or Boner, Charlie Boner? None? Okay. Turnout calls Neha Valmiki. Totally feel bad on that one. You have to tell us. Come on.
You almost got it. It's Neha Valmiki.
Neha Valmiki. Excellent. I've got you as Neha Valmiki. Here on behalf of the UT Austin Student Government Hook the Vote Agency and yourself, and you're for the bill.
Yes.
Great. Please proceed.
Okay. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Election Committee. My name is Neha Valmiki, and I'm here this morning to testify in favor of HB 160. I'm representing UT Austin Student Government Hook the Vote Agency as the co-director. Student IDs are issued to every college student as soon as they're enrolled and show proof of their identity. Students have this free ID on them almost everywhere that they go. HB 160 would only allow students who are already legally and formally registered to vote to then use their student IDs at the polls itself. I've personally seen how important it is for voting to be accessible to all students this past year through Hook the Vote. Many students at UT don't have a driver's license, and the cost of a government-issued ID is a barrier to students who are already trying to make ends meet. On top of this, according to 2011 University of Michigan study, only about 65% of 18-year-olds have licenses. Don't you think these students deserve a voice just as much as students who do have a government-issued ID? It can already be difficult for students to vote considering their hectic work schedules and the feasibility and accessibility of polling locations. Allowing student IDs as a form of a valid voter ID would only help alleviate some of these barriers. We know how much of an impact this would have on not only our students at UT Austin, but all students across Texas. Studies show that people are most likely to become regular voters if they start early and stick with it through their 20s. Many of you have college students and campuses in your own district. I urge you to consider those constituents and the positive impact it can make on their lives. A vote against HB 160 is a vote against your constituents' right to political representation. With this, I urge you to consider just how fundamental this bill is for students and vote in favor of HB 160. It is so pertinent to our democracy for our Texas students to exercise their civic duty, and they can only do that when voting is made for them, not against them. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Members, any questions? Hearing none? Thank you. Chair calls Amanda Garcia. Good evening. Got you down. It's Amanda Garcia here on behalf of UT Austin Student Government and yourself. You are for this bill. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Please proceed.
Good evening, Chairman and Representatives. My name is Amanda Garcia, and I'm the Advocacy Outreach Chair with Hook the Vote. I'm here this evening to testify in favor of this bill as a young college voter myself. Allowing the use of student IDs as a form of voter identification makes it easier for registered student voters to practice their civic duty. This past year, young voters showed up to the polls in record numbers, and we can maintain this trend by letting young voters use their student IDs as a form of valid voter identification. The notion that this provision will allow undocumented or international students to vote is false, because regardless of what form of voter ID is brought, poll workers are still required to check valid voter registration through the system, as the gentleman represented University Democrats pointed out before. Additionally, many of the representatives here today are Texas College alumni themselves, whether it be UT, A&M, Texas State, Baylor, or any other great Texas college. It is your job as a representative to not only represent your constituents, but as an alumni to support the students of your alma mater. So in which case, it makes it even more important for you to support this bill. We understand your fear of voter fraud. However, there has been no proof of widespread voter fraud across Texas, let alone instances of fraud committed by young voters or on college campuses. In fact, according to the Texas Tribune, out of the 90 million ballots casted since 2004, only 150 have been prosecuted as election offenses. The only way and the best way we can combat voter fraud is to make voting accessible to registered voters, and it can start by voting in favor of this bill. It is only a democracy when voters are able to express their opinions, and increasing accessibility for young voters, which comprise the largest voting demographic, is how we can uphold our democracy. With this, I urge you to vote with wisdom and care for your constituents and college students, and vote yes on HB 160. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you.
Turnout calls Jeffrey Clemens. Jeffrey Clemens. Mr. Clemens, if you're in an overflow room, please come to E2028. Turnout calls David Carter.
David Carter, representing self, am opposed to HB 160. It's kind of a shocking display tonight about our rising generation being so concerned and so passionate about voting, but they're seems to be a little shy on self-responsibility. And I know when I have problems with technology to find something, I go to my 20-year-old grandson, and he always straightens me out. So we go to the young folks because they know technology and they can find the requirements of what kind of ID to present when they come to vote. They can find all these things out. All I've heard tonight is excuses. So here's the point. The bill, the law is presently written, I'm looking at it here, is it's in the bill. The first 5 items are all items that you have to have a proof of citizenship, other than that, as Ms. Beckley says, the military ID. When I enlisted in '59, we had Hungarian freedom fighters in my flight at Lackland, and they were not U.S. citizens. But it's a close guess. So all of these all these things require proof of citizenship, and our goal is not to maximize turnout of just anybody who lives and walks and breathes, is to have people who are citizens of the U.S., which is required by U.S. law and state law. You have to be a U.S. citizen to register to vote, and there has to be some proof of that at some point. So it's not just an issue of being a government-issued ID or a university government-issued ID. It's an ID that's been vetted for citizenship. That's the common denominator of the first 5 things. Number 6 being added. Just an ID card issued by a public institution of higher education that doesn't have anything to do with our system of verifying eligibility to vote in Texas. So the other thing is I was here 10 years ago, when in 2011, I think is when we had our first photo voter ID bill that finally passed muster. And there had to be changes made to the reasonable impediment form was part of that, and the ability to get free DPS issued voter ID. There's 2 kinds of IDs. There's ID that you pay for, and there's ID for voting, which is free. I think that's still in the law, and it was put in back then. So all these things that are called impediments and disenfranchisement of young people is kind of over the top.
Okay.
I've run out of things to say. That's my basic impression of this thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Carter. Members, any questions? No. Thank you. Sure. Now, is there anyone else, or did I call your name and you come? What was your name? We did call you. One moment, ma'am. Let's put you.
Did you call me?
Yes. Right. We'll bring up. Chair calls Diane Chambliss. Who've got you here is Diana Chambliss, here on behalf of herself, and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
Right.
Please proceed.
So I have a lot more confidence in the college students than the college students themselves, because I think they really can figure out how to get a valid voter ID somehow. It's not that hard. Today, the acceptable forms of photo ID, like the gentleman said, are driver's license, a military ID, a passport, and they have been issued after a rather proven process. They all look pretty familiar. We know what to look for there, and they have verifiable information on the card. But on school IDs, there are over 159 universities and colleges in Texas. And that doesn't count the small junior colleges. And by the way, do trade schools count? We don't know. These IDs are all different. They have a different process for issuing them. They look different. There is purposely, currently, limited information on a school ID, and they don't include addresses, et cetera, usually just a picture, a barcode, and the name. It doesn't state whether the person is a U.S. citizen or not. The process to update all these schools and colleges and trade schools is going to be expensive and probably have a lot of slip-ups in it. There's no, like I said, there's no statewide record or database for which to access to check the validity of the student ID. To me, adding yet another form of ID is going in the opposite direction of election integrity. This bill does nothing to enhance election integrity and arguably leaves yet another opening for voter fraud to occur. We have enough voter ID issues with our driver's licenses for non-citizens who try to vote, and let's not add another problem to this mix right now. We need secure and honest election laws. College students are smart or they wouldn't be in college, and I think they can figure out how to vote. So we want to, adding school IDs would just be one more way to muddy the waters. Questions?
Yes, members, any questions? None, thank you.
Thanks.
Chair now calls before that, Christina Atkins, is she here? I'll bring you up.
Good evening, Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State's office on HB 160.
Yes. Just help us out. There you go. Chair recognizes Representative Fierro.
Thank you for being here this evening. I know it's been a long day for us too. I had a couple of questions for you. One is, has your agency ever looked into the 7 other states that use student IDs as identification to be able to vote?
Not recently that I recall. I mean, if we've done some research on that, maybe when the voter ID first came about or the more recent changes, I just don't have that information.
Okay. And secondly, somebody stated that a driver's license was valid ID for 4 years after it expired?
Correct. What the law says is that it provides an additional time frame for which you can use that ID even if it is expired. And for people that are 70 or older, it doesn't. There is no expiration date.
Okay. And are you aware that do driver's license indicate whether you're a citizen or not?
Actually, I believe that yes, there can be a designation that's printed on the driver's license that it can indicate if what your citizenship status is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Is that part of the Real ID movement?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Members, any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on, for, or against House Bill 160? Okay. Well, I mean, I've called everybody on my list. What is your name?
Charlie Bonner.
Charlie. All right, you're here now. Okay. Chair calls up Charlie Bonner.
That is a Bonner. That's not a Bonner. The stream is delayed. Thank you so much for having me.
Charlie, you have to wear your denim jacket in this.
I know. I'm running out of outfits for this committee for themes. So
Charlie Bonner.
We got to wrap up these meetings.
You're on behalf of yourself.
Yes, sir.
For this bill.
Yes.
Correct. All right. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much. It's been a long day, so I will keep my remarks short. But I am someone who greatly would have benefited from this legislation, so I definitely want to thank the representative for bringing this forward. I was born in Texas, but very unfortunately, I had to move to Virginia to go to high school, and so I was actually an out-of-state student when I came here to go to the University of Texas. I didn't have a driver's license because I did not have a car, and so it wasn't necessary for me to get one. And my parents, unfortunately, wouldn't send me my passport because they were very afraid that I would go to Mexico as a college freshman, which was a real conversation I had to have with my mother when I asked her to mail it to me so that I could be a first-time voter and vote in that first election. It would have been so much easier for me to make my voice heard in my very first election. election if I could have used that student ID provided to me by the government through a process very similar to those that we go through to acquire every other form of ID. And I know that all of us here really care about building a new generation of voters, increasing turnout in this state. You wouldn't be on the elections committee if you didn't care about building a strong democracy in this state. I know that to be true. And so we need to build up this new generation of voters. And one of the ways in which we do that is by investing in young voters. If we can get people to vote in those first couple elections of their life, we will make lifelong voters and will fundamentally change the electorate here in Texas and really turn around those turnout numbers that are not something that we should be proud of right now. So I really think this is a great first step. I want to thank the representative again and thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you. Members, any questions? Mr. Clardy is recognized. Representative Clardy.
Thank you, Chairman Kane. I just want to say, I don't think anyone's at any risk of your voice not being heard. But thank you for coming here.
Thank you, Representative.
We needed that tonight.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Okay, and when I called for anyone else, I saw one more hand. Is there anyone else? Okay, thank you. Well, the chair now recognizes Representative Weiner to close on the bill.
Thank you so much, committee members. I know it's been quite a day. I know y'all are at 12 hours now. I want to address just a couple of the issues that came up. First of all, it's a really common idea that the address on your photo ID should match where you're registered to vote, but that's actually not part of Texas law. That address does not have to match. I can say from personal experience, first time I voted here in Texas after getting back from graduate school, I voted with a passport with an address on it that was out of state. And that's pretty common. These federal forms of ID in particular very commonly do not match, and your driver's license address also does not have to match. These IDs are not used to verify your registration address in any way. State of residence, same issue. Particularly with a military ID, passport, or citizenship certificate, it's fairly common for those to potentially not match, especially since, you know, passports are valid for a decade. I'm sure y'all have all been through the process to get one of those. You don't get another one on a lark just because you changed households. Citizenship status. Most of the forms of ID that we allow for voting in Texas do not confirm your citizenship status and are eligible to people with green cards. That includes driver's licenses, handgun license, military ID, and personal identification cards. Voter ID does not confirm citizenship, and it never has. This is a fallacy that folks latch onto. So student IDs are secure. They've come a long way from when I was in college, and I was in college, I believe, more recently than everybody on this committee. And as the person who was in college more recently than everybody on this, you graduated before me, John. It was close. It was close. You in the chair are only a couple years ahead of me, but no, I don't know if y'all remember filling out the FAFSA, but I can guarantee you our universities know who our students are. That is more information than we provide for a driver's license. So these absolutely can be secure forms of identification. And the other thing I'll bring up, Representative Clardy, who I'm sorry graduated from college much earlier than I did. Yeah. You brought up our house IDs. You know, with all due respect, those are things that are available to about 181 people in the building. There are 1.4 million Texans enrolled in our institutions of higher education today. Is every single one of them eligible to vote in Texas? No, but a fair number of them are. And I think us smoothing the pathway for them to be able to vote conveniently, easily is important. Because what we know is when people start voting young, they tend to keep voting. And that's what I want. I want a Texas full of voters. And I don't want any first-time voter to be turned away at the polls because they didn't understand what they needed to bring with them or because they walked in with what they had on them. I'll also note that our university locations often have long polling lines. Texas State University had historic lines both in the 2020 primary and in the 2018 general where students waited hours to vote. So folks are talking about students not trying hard enough. I watched students sit in a line for 4 hours to be able to vote. Can you imagine sitting in that line and getting up there and realizing that you couldn't use your student ID to vote and being turned away? I don't know about y'all, but I'd be furious. So that's something I hope y'all take into consideration, and I hope you'll consider this bill favorably.
The chair recognizes Representative Clardy.
Thank you, Chairman Kane, and thank you, Representative Zwiener, for bringing this bill and for the explanation. A couple of questions.
Thank you for letting me razz you a little bit.
I'm getting kind of used to it.
Question.
I don't know why people always want to pick on me, but it seems to be the case. But one is, have you considered amending the bill or broadening the bill where it applies not only to state universities, but also to our junior college, community college networks, and more importantly to me, as a proud graduate of Abilene Christian University who did take down the Longhorns in basketball in the recent NCAA tournament, which, have I said that before on the record? I'm not sure if I've mentioned that before, but head to the private universities. So I think the point that you're making with the bill is if there's a validated form of identification with a picture, with a name, date of birth, which can be used again to prove identification, not eligibility to vote, but just for that. Have you considered broadening it beyond the SFAs in Nacogdoches or the Texas State in San Marcos or the other fine state institutions that we have?
Yeah, this is a refile of a bill we filed last session. I believe the last version was closer to that. Quite frankly, we decided we had a better shot at passing the legislation if we narrowed it to public institutions. But the way the legislation is written is an identification card issued by a public institution of higher education. So it should actually include technical colleges and community colleges as written. And I do want to say I also appreciate some of the concerns you brought up about security. And I think this is something that we could absolutely work together to put some strong parameters around and make sure that we have, some consistent standards for what the minimum amount on these IDs should be in order to be
And I would think some of our private universities have some of the same security issues on campus as other issues where they have the same protection of private information and data for individuals, have probably similar security concerns and interest and technology where that might need to be looked at as well.
I agree.
Is there a way to limit this where it can only be used by college Republicans or young conservatives of Texas?
No, sir, and I would definitely not be amenable to amending this bill in this way because I believe that everyone should be able to vote whether they agree with me or not.
I'm just running that up the flagpole. I thought that'd be easier. But I do appreciate the intent of the bill and really appreciate you bringing it to us. There's some things I'm still working with, but thank you for bringing this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. Chair now recognizes Representative Beckley.
I just want to give you a kudos because I'm pretty sure you got your daughter's name into your layout.
I saw Lark.
You said Lark.
Oh, on a lark. I did. You're right.
You did.
That was-
Kudos to you.
Thank you, Michelle.
When you said it, I
Thank
thought
you,
you did it on
Representative Beckley.
purpose.
I did too.
Yep.
We have to laugh.
Thank you. Is that it?
All right, well, I close. Thanks, members.
Thank you, Representative Zwiener. If there's no objection, the bill will be left pending. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the bill is left pending. Okay. All right.
That won't be for a while.
All right, members, we're going to take up a vote real quick on House Bill 1183 by Chairman Dutton. A moment. Does anybody have a question about that bill? House Bill 1183 by Chairman Dutton. He laid out earlier. Okay. I'm going to wait for Representative Busey. Members, the chair lays out as pending business House Bill 1183. Members of the bill we heard previously relating to eligibility requirements for public office into the form of an application for a place on the ballot. Representative Swanson moves that House Bill 1183, without amendment, be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Nay.
Beckley.
Nay.
Busey.
No.
Clardy.
Aye.
Fierro.
No.
Jatan.
Aye.
Schofield.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
There being 5 ayes and 4 nays, the motion prevails. Chair now lays out as pending business Senate Bill 7 by Senator Hughes. Senate Bill 7 is the bill relating to elections, including election integrity and security, creating criminal offenses and providing civil penalties. Chair Offord.
I do have some committee amendments, as I mentioned earlier in the initial. So I'd like an opportunity to.
Yes, your amendments will be in order at a later time.
All right, thank you.
The chair offers up committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none. The substitute is adopted. Now we'll go to amendments. To be respectful of our pending business and witnesses, chair is limiting amendments to those on my desk. So pass them over. So we have amendments. Please offer them over now or spread them out to the members. We will limit explanations of an amendment to 3 minutes and limit discussion of each to 5 minutes. Yeah.
Republican caucus.
Apparently, it's running deep. We just.
Yeah, we should pass them around.
Oh, I'm passing these down too, right?
Nobody's giving me anything.
Mines were being passed down in the folder. Or in the.
What are you saying, the folder's coming?
There was like 4 manila folders with.
Oh, yeah, but I did not put my name on
We're supposed to.
it. My
There's.
staff did not put my name on it.
What's going on?
Right now, we're sorting out these committee amendments. So,
Do I need to put my name on it?
please give us a moment.
That's all.
There were. Hey, Jessica. Jessica. The 4 folders that I passed out, they're all the same copies of like each one. Yeah.
Oh, that's what this is?
Hopefully you remember yours.
I'll see the crowd left, Michelle. The audience left, apparently. Oh.
For hers,
Okay, members, if you could look through the amendments that you have. Yes. Yep. So heads up, we're going to begin, members, we're going to begin with the Beckley Amendments. So it's going to kind of go in and out for order. I'm just letting you know, we're going to begin with Beckley Amendments. You should have two.
I gotta pee first.
Okay, members, on your desk, you should have two Beckley amendments. The first one that's one page, I'm going to call Committee Amendment number 1, and the two-pager we will call Committee Amendment number 2. Okay. Just a reminder, the one-page amendment by Representative Beckley, we're going to call Amendment 1. The two-page amendment by Representative Beckley, we're going to call Amendment 2.
one first?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay.
And also as a reminder, we're going to be limiting the explanation of the amendment to 3 minutes and discussion to 5. Members going to begin with committee amendment number 1, offered up by Representative Beckley. Okay, so Representative Beckley offers up an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Beckley to explain the amendment.
I don't think I have the
They went out? Okay.
The chair recognizes Representative Beckley to explain the amendment.
This is a single page one, right? Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members, this amendment would simply instruct the Secretary of State to coordinate with the Department of Public Safety to implement a program that allows a person with an unexpired driver's license or personal ID issued by the state of Texas to complete a secure voter registration application over the internet from a secure site. This secure online application allows the Secretary of State to compare information on voter registration application against the Department of Public Safety records to verify that all information provided by the applicant qualifies them to legally vote in this state. Once confirmed, this verified information and verified signature of the applicant will be sent to the county voter registration office where the applicant currently resides. This amendment would ensure any and all Texans that they are eligible to vote have secure access to application or renewal of their registration through safety and security measures instituted by the Secretary of State and the Department of Public Safety to ensure election integrity. Move adoption.
Can I raise a point of order? That's not germane to the bill.
The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez. Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy.
Nay.
Fierro. Jeton.
Nay.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment fails.
Let me keep it.
Moving to the 2-page amendment by Representative Beckley. Representative Beckley offers an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Beckley to explain the amendment.
This is for countywide polling place program. This includes additional equipment that is not currently included.
Again, for the record, I raise a point of order that's not germane to the bill. If you're not accepting points, just want that noted.
Thanks, sir. Can you withdraw are you withdrawing your point of order, Representative Schofield? Thank you. The question, are there any questions of Representative Beckley? None. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy.
Nay.
Fierro. Jeton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment fails. Okay, members, we're going to now move on to the Busey amendments. We will begin with, I guess, the one that begins with striking lines 27 and substituting the following. That amendment.
Yeah, the page 3 one, I think.
Yes, we're going to call that Amendment 3. And the next one we'll call Amendment 4. Representative Busey offers an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Busey to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer the following amendment for committee substitute. Senate Bill 7. This is tied to a discussion we had in committee about poll watcher, just some of the conflict language in the bill. Members, this is a simple amendment to remove the direct conflict between Section 301 and Section 306 of the committee substitute with respect to the circumstances under which a presiding judge may remove a poll watcher by saying that poll watchers may be removed except as permitted by this code and described by Section 33.062. We heard a lot about this, and I think it's critical that this is corrected before we move forward, and I move adoption.
Thank you, Representative Busey. Are there any questions of Representative Busey? The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez. Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy. Fierro. Chaton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment is adopted. Okay, thank you. Members, I'm seeing some amendments. The amendment is not adopted. The amendment fails. Members, I'm seeing some amendments being passed out. What are these? Okay. We have them. Now moving on to the proposed amendment by Representative Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the
One
following.
moment. So, yeah, I just want to describe for people, this is what we're going to call Amendment 4.
Sure.
This is one that says it's, on page 17, line 27, between if and the. So we're going to call 4. Representative Busey offers an amendment to the committee substitute. Chair recognizes Representative Busey to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer the following amendment for committee substitute SB 7. Members, this is a simple amendment that would bring the provisions with respect to the perjury offense being created in line with perjury under the penal code by adding in language that the person committing the offense must have the intent to deceive and knowledge of the statement's meaning. All I am hoping to do here is avoid criminalizing simple mistakes and have uniformity and consistency. I move adoption.
Are there any questions of Representative Busey? No. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey. Clardy.
Nay.
Fierro.
Aye.
Chaton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes, 5 nays, the amendment fails. Okay, members, you should also have 2 amendments by Representative Fierro on your desk. We begin with the shorter amendment. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
These are amendments offered as amendments to the committee vote. Does the submission of a committee amendment preclude or prohibit a member from submitting a similar amendment on the floor of the full House?
It does not. The bill would be at a different stage.
Oh, if parliamentary inquiry?
Please state your inquiry.
So if members would have the opportunity on the floor to vote on these same amendments and have more opportunity perhaps to review those amendments and determine whether they are efficacious or advisable or preferred to make the bill a better bill at some later point when the full House can consider SB 7 should this committee vote it out.
I believe that's an accurate assessment. In fact, whether or not the committee adopts these amendments now, the House still has to vote to adopt them. And so they could either offer them there on the floor or offer them here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. Okay, members, we have two amendments by Representative Fierro. We're going to begin with the shorter one, one that's not 9 lines long. I'm going to call that amendment number 5, and the other 6. Representative Fierro Representative Fierro offers up an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Fierro to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the first amendment is the one that resembles me. As this bill stands, a poll watcher can only be removed by a judge for engaging in election fraud, as defined by the code. That code doesn't include voter intimidation, disruption. This amendment would simply add such behavior as a reason for removal.
Okay. Members, are there any questions for Representative Fierro? Not the question. Okay. The chair recognizes.
Fierro, should this not be adopted tonight, do you intend to bring this on the floor? Should we get that far?
Representative, that's my intention.
In substantially the same form?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
But we can vote on it now if you'd like. Whatever's easier for you, Representative.
Okay. We're going to begin voting on members. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy.
Nay.
Fierro.
Aye.
Jeton.
No.
Schofield. No. Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes, 5 nays, the amendment fails. We're going to now move on to the taller amendment by Representative Fierro. Calling that amendment number 6. Representative Fierro offers an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Fierro to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment simply adjusts the definition of paid voter harvesting to read knowingly collecting or possessing a ballot voted by mail or official carrier envelope from a voter without voter's consent. The key word here is voter consent. And the idea behind this is that if a voter does in fact want and need assistance with their mail-in ballot, those assisting them shouldn't be penalized.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Members, any questions for Representative Fierro? None. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy.
Nay.
Fierro.
Aye.
Jeton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes, 5 nays, the amendment fails. All right, members, you should have, if you do, you would have 3 amendments by Representative Gonzalez. We're going to take up the shorter one first. We're going to call that committee amendment number 7. Representative Gonzalez offers an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chair, members. This amendment requires that the Secretary of State conduct a racial impact analysis on the provisions of SB 7 and every portion of the bill that creates criminal offenses or increases criminal penalties. It's imperative. We understand as a legislature how these laws impact brown and black Texans. We've had several questions come before, or that we've asked of folks wanting this information. In January 2023, before the start of session, the Secretary of State will prepare a report to the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, AG, the DOJ, Speaker of the House, and our committee, so we can work together to determine further action. I move adoption of this amendment.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Representative Gonzalez? None. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley. Busey. Clardy. Fierro. Jeton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment fails. Okay, members, we're going to begin with, how about the amendment that would be seeking to change sections, how about on section 84 of the election code, that would be the amendment we're going to begin with. We're going to call this amendment number 8.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Give you a moment to locate the amendment we're discussing.
All right, Mr. Chair, members, this amendment would direct the Secretary of State to implement a program for Texans to complete an application for an early voting ballot by mail online. Applicants will be allowed to electronically sign the application and check the status of their application. Move adoption.
All right. Well, just in case, let me real quick to clear it up. So Representative Gonzalez was offered up an amendment to the committee substitute. She was recognized. You've explained it. Members, are there any questions for Representative Gonzalez? The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. Clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey. Clardy. Fierro. Ton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes and 5 nays, the amendment fails. Members, we're now, I believe, on our last amendment. It's the one you'll see, I guess, at the top. It begins with amending SB number 7 and on page 22. So give you a moment to be able to identify it. Okay, Representative Gonzalez offers an amendment to the committee substitute. The chair recognizes Representative Gonzalez to explain the amendment.
Thank you. This amendment would require the Attorney General to collect data from each investigation or prosecution started under this bill. As we know, when the Attorney General's office is pressed for data about racial impact of the work that their elections fraud unit completes, this will ensure that the legislature is informed of the race, gender, age, county of origin for each investigation or prosecution opened under bills being debated by this body this session. It would also require an annual report from the AG's office to the legislature and the executive branch, as well as a principal deputy assistant attorney general for the Civil Rights Division of DOJ, the agency responsible for holding states accountable for racially disparate election laws. As the legislature passes more voter suppression legislation this session and empowers the AG to play a role in intimidating voters, it's important that we collect and report data to ensure that the law is being applied in an equitable way and not targeting minority communities. I move adoption.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Representative Gonzalez? The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment to the committee substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Nay.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Aye.
Beckley.
Aye.
Busey.
Aye.
Clardy.
Aye.
Fierro.
Aye.
Jaton.
No.
Schofield.
No.
Swanson.
No.
There being 4 ayes, 5 nays, the amendment fails. The chair moves that SB 7, as substituted, be reported favorably to.
Can I be recognized?
Okay. The chair recognizes Representative Busey.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say this is part of what we were seeking this morning, is the opportunity to review the committee sub. The delay allowed us to do that throughout the day, and we want the opportunity to work the process in front of everybody, do these committee amendments, and then hopefully, if it's not going to happen today, moving forward, hear from the people we represent about their positions on the bill. So thank you for going through the amendment process, and we hope to be able to have time moving forward to look at committee subs and prepare.
Thank you, Representative Busey. Members, anything else? Thank you. The chair moves that Senate Bill 7, as substituted, be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Kane.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
No.
Beckley.
No.
Busey.
No.
Clardy.
Aye.
Fierro.
No.
Jaton.
Aye.
Schofield.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
There being 5 ayes and 4 nays, the motion prevails. Okay, Representative Busey, you're able to close for Senate Bill 1018 or finish it out? So, members, we're going to move on to hearing bills. And we're going to bring up Senate Bill 1018. Okay. The chair now calls up Dan Chandler. Mr. Dan Chandler. Chair now calls Jeffrey Clemens. Howdy, sir. Got you as Jeffrey Clemens, here on behalf of the Austin College Student Commission, Houston Tillotson, NAACP, Texas Rising, and yourself, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please proceed.
The essential thing I want to say is that I think that this bill is a good bill, and I'm in support of it. I don't have many other comments, really.
Okay. Members, any questions? Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
The chair now calls Susana Carranza. Howdy, ma'am. We all know you as a lady that maybe has registered more voters than anyone in this building. Okay, Susana Carranza.
Not really.
No?
Valerie did more than I.
Here, okay. Susana Carranza, here on behalf of yourself, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Well, I support this bill because it's refreshing to see a bill finally that actually helps voters after seeing the tremendous attack on voting rights that we're seeing in this committee, sadly. This bill helps voters that voted by mail to fix if there's an issue. It establishes a process for the voters to be contacted and inform promptly the voters and allow them one or more methods to cure it. I applaud this bill. I urge you to support this bill. It's going to help a lot of voters that rely on voting by mail. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any questions for Ms. Carranza? None? Thank you so much. Okay. Chair now lays out or calls up Cindy Weatherby. And I've got you as Cindy Weatherby here on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas and yourself, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
I am, and we are. Thank you very much. Like a lot of other voters in 2020, I was one of the first-time users of vote by mail. I know it's a real surprise to you that I actually qualified a few years ago, just a few. And it's something that a lot of other voters did for the first time, too. And if you've ever looked at the vote by mail paraphernalia that you get, the envelope that you receive that's full of other information, and then the return carrier envelope, it's complicated and confusing for people. And I know that there were a lot of those ballots that were missing some element that this bill addresses. And a lot of those ballots, people found out, didn't get registered as a ballot. I mean, their vote did not count. They didn't find that out until afterwards, of course. And some people were totally devastated by that. You know, there are a lot of people that have voted in every election in person, chose to vote this way, maybe forgot the signature, maybe the signature wasn't the same as matched, whatever the reason. You heard all of those reasons this morning, and I won't go into that again. But this bill is a step in the right direction, and we thank Senator Zaffarini and Representative Hinojosa for introducing it, and do believe that it would be very helpful and certainly urge your passage of the bill.
Wow.
So thank you for your attention.
Members, any questions? Thank you, ma'am. Chair now calls Bill Sargent. Howdy, I got you as Bill Sargent here on behalf of yourself, and you were testifying on this bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Please proceed.
I was opposed to this bill in the Senate, and I still have concerns. It is a good thing if you let a voter correct his or her own ballot by mail or the mail carrier envelope, but you must also do it the same for every other voter as well. So you're not treating one voter one way and another voter a different way. If you do it for one, you have to do it for all. As an aside, I don't remember collecting phone numbers or email addresses for ballot by mail applications when I was working with Galveston County elections. That leaves me only one option, which would be by mail. This bill also is good from the fact that it allows voters to correct their ballots by mail. Allowing voters to correct their ballots by mail is permissive as opposed to mandatory, because this could provide additional cost and resources for county clerks in the counties that do this. This leaves the question, is the early voting ballot board the one that makes the decision? I believe the legislation, the answer to that in the legislation would be yes. I believe the county clerk, however, should have a say, since it is his or her resources that are being expended. As I read the bill, the county clerk has no say as to whether it's done or not. I much prefer Representative Jeton's, I'm going to say J.C. Jeton's, Bill 3200 and its approach, but which is the bill I think you should pass as opposed to this one. But this is an improvement over what we saw on the Senate side.
Okay, thank you, sir. Members, any questions? None? Thank you. Chair now calls Chris Davis. Okay. Members, we do have resource witnesses here. Does anybody like to hear from the Secretary of State? Nope. Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 1018? If not, the chair recognizes Representative Busey to close on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Representative Hinojosa, the Senate authors, Affarini, and her joint author, Senator Hughes, this bipartisan bill, I think, should be considered highly by this committee. This bill implements a procedure to fix a mail-in ballot with guardrails that will promote secure, transparent vote counts and uphold the integrity of our state's elections process by ensuring that all valid mail-in ballots are counted and the voices of all Texans and voters are accurately represented. I ask for your favorable support of Senate Bill 1018, and I close.
Thank you, Representative Busey. If there is no objection, the bill will be left pending. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the bill is left pending.
Barney.
Yes.
Wait, I'm about to lay out my bill. Where are you going?
At this time, the chair is going to pass the gavel to Representative Clardy.
Go get something to eat.
Yeah, it's going to be
Some of these chairs, right? Leave that. This better be good. Thank you, Chairman Kane. The chair now lays out House Bill 32 and also lays out the committee substitute offered by Representative Fierro. The chair recognizes Representative Fierro to explain the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Clardy. And it just has a ring to it, doesn't it, Chairman Clardy? Chairman, Vice Chair, members, thank you very much. House Bill 32 simply amends the election code to expand voting outside the polling place, also known as curbside voting, to parents, legal guardians, grandparents of children. Under current Texas law, parents, legal guardians that have children that require supervision are eligible to request that an election officer deliver a ballot to the voter at a polling place or curb. Parents with children that require constant supervision and Chairman Clardy, these are not known as the Fierro children, may refrain from voting because it is difficult for them to enter a polling place and supervise their children. House Bill 32 would make voting more accessible for parents, legal guardians, grandparents, and encourage voting participation. The committee sub simply lowers the age threshold to 5 and under. Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions if you have any, or I reserve my right to close.
Thank you, Representative Fierro. Members, any questions? The chair recognizes Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Chairman, and always enjoy talking about these issues with you, Representative. And just like last year, I can't support this bill. Have you ever run an election? Have you been an election judge?
No, I've never been an election judge, Representative, but I have been a parent that goes to a polling place with a child under 5 that couldn't be left in the car, that needed to go in. And we had this conversation last time with children over 5 who see this as an opportunity, a learning opportunity for them to get to see how the experience is and for them to experience the polling place.
I agree. And as someone who held elections for 23 years, I think, I was, including many of those years at an elementary school where people brought in their babies, preschoolers, and then often waited till school got out and brought in their elementary kids. I have never, ever had trouble with a child at the polls, ever, and had many, many kids come in, and it was a great experience for them. And my concern is that I think this wouldn't, unless you've worked the elections, you might not truly appreciate what this would do, because you have to have one member of each party. You're likely going to have the election judge and the alternate judge, which one of those may be the only person from that party. They will be forced to leave everything going on inside and go out and both observe that person voting outside. And not only would it leave people very shorthanded, but it might leave one party with absolutely no one inside, and that's just a totally unacceptable problem because, as everybody's talked about, we have to have both parties present all the time observing. And so even though I feel like this bill has been very, very, has great motives, I feel like it's trying to solve a problem that I never in all my years ever saw exist. Like, I saw very well-behaved kids and kids enjoying voting and going with mom or dad or whoever, and they made it a family thing. But we simply could not have survived if we'd had that many people expecting curbside voting. Curbside voting is rightfully left for people with disabilities. It would do that also. You end up getting typically one machine that's made to go outside, and that it would put all the people with disabilities at a huge disadvantage. They'd be having to wait in line behind all kind of people that are perfectly capable of going in and should teach their children to vote. So that would be a huge problem. I can think of quite a few more problems, but just trying to keep up with who's outside, who's needed, could get to be quite a nightmare and really, really throw our elections off. So thank you for thinking of parents, but it's a great experience. The kids need to go in, and we need to have election integrity inside by keeping our workers in there observing both parties, except in the situation where we truly have somebody disabled. Those are the people who should be able to use this, and we need to make sure we're taking care of them, not filling up those parking spots, not taking away everything. And also, we had people in this last election in Harris County, there may be people talking about it, that they had trouble since they created this new drive-through thing for all these, and those machines were not capable of them taking the votes and then putting them onto our what we call our JBCs, and so things were not getting recorded properly. It was very much a nightmare, and I really think that although well-intentioned, this bill would be, I hate to say it, but a disaster.
Oh.
Okay, sorry. I know it's very well-intentioned.
No, you're valid points. I do need to bring up a couple of things. As you mentioned, we already have this process for people with disabilities. I happen to be somebody who voted through one of those drive-thrus that you said didn't work, and it was absolutely great. And I know many people in El Paso that used that. Our elections judge in El Paso, administrator, will swears by it. It's just a great process. I think Harris County may be a little bit different. And you brought up something that a term that's used in this committee very often, a problem looking for a solution. And I have
I'm sorry, a solution looking for a problem. I said it wrong, possibly.
Well, it's probably, thank you very much for bringing that up. But I think this is an opportunity for parents, and you with your beautiful granddaughter of yours, when you go through the vote, and now that you're not an election judge, if she's asleep in the car, I don't think you're going to wake her up and drag her in there. So this is just an opportunity for parents who don't have all the luxuries that maybe you had when you were voting or taking your children to vote. This is just another option. But thank you very much for your input.
We have very, very long early voting and hours, and so I do feel like if you had an unusual person who didn't feel like they could take their child in, that we provide a lot of opportunities.
I don't think any people are unusual. I think they're all special, but yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative Swanson,
Thank
for
you.
questions, and thank you, Representative Fierro. Members, any other questions for the Representative Fierro? Hearing none, let's move forward then with the testimony. We have several guests here who've registered to testify. The chair calls Andrew Eller to testify. And sir, if you would please, you know the drill. Name, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
Yes, my name is Andrew Eller. I am testifying on behalf of myself, and I am against the bill. I would like to say, Representative Swanson, you just took all the words right out of my mouth. You basically ruined my testimony. As an election judge for over 25 years, the very things that Representative Swanson pointed out, I have seen. Kids love to come in and vote with their parents. My main concern is the extra work required to go to the curbside voting for these types of votes. Also, I don't know how many people would do this, but borrowing a friend's kids so they could curbside vote, taking the, I don't know if that would happen, but I'm just saying, you got to think about these things. The other thing is a lot of times these kids, I've been doing this for a long, long time, and these kids do love to come in with their parents and vote. Sometimes you have a new mother maybe that's got a baby in a little carrier or something like that. And typically what I do is, we do have the priority voting for those who have mobility issues. And although, a new mother or a mother with 3 kids hanging off of her won't necessarily be the one who would have mobility issues per se, I actually ask my clerks when they see those types of people in line to just ask, would you like to come to the front of the line, and then ask those in front of them if that's okay. And when they do that, 9 out of 10 times, the person will say, no, I'm okay, I'll stay in line. But then when they do say they'd like to come to the front, the others in front of them will say, oh yeah, I understand, and they'll let them do it. The other thing we like to do is when there's a kid in there, we have the I voted stickers. The kids love those. You put them on it and they're like, oh, I can go show my friends that I went in to vote with my parents.
That's not voter harvesting?
No, that's actually not voter harvesting, but it lets the kids, the kids love stickers. So I would say, well-intentioned bill, but I think it would just create too many other problems, as Representative Swanson pointed out. And there are other solutions that we can do, like I just pointed out with, asking would they like to come to the front of the line, and the others around them if that's okay. So there are ways around that.
Thank you, Mr. Eller. Members, any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. All right, this time we will call Ms. Susanna Carranza. While you're making your way up here, Susanna, we're also going to have, my thing reset here on me. Diana Chambliss, I think we'll have you up next. All right, if you'd please give us your name, your position on the bill, and who you represent.
I'm Susanna Carranza. I'm for the bill, and I'm representing myself. First, I would like to say to your comments is that just because it's difficult to implement doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. So, but I would like to commend you to try to make it easier for families to vote together, because while maybe we haven't seen unruly kids in the polls, is because the families that would need that, they just gave up voting because it would be really difficult for them to take all their kids to the polls, and they just decided that they just couldn't do it. So that might be one of the reasons we don't see them. I think we should make the option to make voting accessible whenever we can for all eligible voters, make it safe for families to vote. I mean, we are supposed to be a state that really likes big families and all, and then you should make easy for the parent, because usually one parent is working, the other one, it's not easy to have childcare. You might have to remove a bunch of kids from car seats. Like, how do you handle all of that? And you have to just because you have a family, you just can't vote. It's like, I applaud you. Thank you. I urge all to support the bill. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Kranzik. Members, questions? Thank you for your testimony. All right, at this time, the chair calls Diana Chambliss. And if you would please, aren't we all? If you'd please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
My name is Dee Chambliss. I represent myself, and I oppose this bill. I worked as a poll worker last November, and we had very few workers because we're not a large metropolitan area, and we all worked over 12 hours. It was a long day, and we stayed very busy the whole time. At certain times, an elderly or a disabled person would show up, and they were so happy to be able to vote from their car, and it took a little bit longer, but we were really happy to serve them and wait on our disabled and elderly voters. There were a lot of parents who showed up with young children, and they successfully voted because we worked hard to keep the lines running smoothly. The people that needed to vote from their cars did so, and every able-bodied person came in to vote. Now, I think you're a nice guy, and I like you. I can't say that for everybody, but I do like you.
I'm sorry, Ms. Chambliss. I've got to interrupt your testimony. I know him better than you. I don't think
you shouldn't. Okay, I take it back.
Say that.
I take it all back.
He is a nice guy, but please proceed.
As I read Bill 32, I saw a really glaring omission in Section 2A1 regarding parents or legal guardians accompanied by their child. How do we know it's their kid? What if the so-called child is 17? Our already scarce poll workers are now supposed to spend time checking the identity of the parent and the child. I bring this up only because it's a very huge loophole, and I have visions of perfectly able-bodied people renting kids in order to avoid getting out of their car. This would put a huge burden on us poll workers and the election judges, as you said, Ms. Swanson. It would delay a process that we're working really hard to keep running smoothly. Part of being a parent includes hauling your kids to the mall, to the park, to the grocery store, you name it. You're doing it now, and you're going to be able to do it. Coming to vote with the kids, of which I have firsthand knowledge, is part of life. It is not voter suppression. It applies to all people. And those who are asking to vote from their car when they're perfectly able to vote inside do so to the detriment of the poll workers that are working so hard and so long. Voting from your car is an entitlement for the elderly and the disabled. And excuse me, but it is not for the able-bodied snowflakes that don't want to get out of their car. Voting is a right that we should thank God that we have here in America. And to my overly entitled friends on the left who are whining and crying about having to get out of their car once or twice a year, and I have a lot of friends on the left. I know it's hard to believe, but I do. And they are whining and crying about having to get out of their car once or twice a year in order to access the privilege of voting. I ask them, do you get out of your car for your weekly pedicure? Do you get out of your car to go shopping? And do you get out of your car for a fine dining experience? If so, you can damn well get out of your car and vote. but I don't mean to be rude.
Oh, no.
So
But I
that's
will,
how I feel.
I will read to my children.
Thank you, Ms. Chambliss, for your testimony.
Any questions?
Any questions about pedicures, manicures, anything?
Not just weekly, but that's,
Weekly's a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so moving forward, let's call Mr. Bill Sargent up to the stand, who I know knows what he's supposed to say. And on deck, we'll have Cindy Weatherby after Mr. Sargent.
I think I registered on the bill, did I not? Bill Sargent, former Chief Deputy Clerk for Elections from Galveston County, and I'm testifying for myself. Representative, I'm not really sure why this bill is necessary. I like you, but I'm not sure why this is necessary.
I have more friends on that side I do on this side.
Those people with boots on the ground are not going to ask a voter in a car if they're disabled. They're just not going to put themselves in that kind of a position, because if the person doesn't look, doesn't look disabled, but maybe they have something some malady we don't know about, you're just not going to do that. You're going to embarrass the voter, as well as you're going to maybe put yourself in legal jeopardy for having done that. So, anybody who comes to for a curbside vote where we are, they get it. I don't care what the reason is. If they ask for a curbside vote, they'll get it. The part about the children, when I work elections, and I still do work elections, even though I'm not running them now, as a judge, I ask that anybody comes in with a child, I get them. And I say, now, Joey, would you like to help sign your parents in? And Joey, what's this? This is a driver's license. Whose picture's on that driver's license? That's your dad, huh? Okay. Well, now we're going to put this right here, and we scan it, and wow, look, it came up on the screen. This is the person, your dad's record. Is that who your dad is? Yes, it is. Well, push this button here. And I tell them which button to push. They push it, and the screen changes. They get all excited, right? I mean, this is what it's all about. We want to get young people involved with the voting process, and I just enjoy the heck out of that. That is so much fun, and the kids love it. And of course, the I voted stickers. That's sometimes we even give them two. But they really enjoy it. So I'm not really sure why you need to have this bill, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. Members, questions? Thank you for being here with us. All right, at this time, the chair will call Mr. Kenneth Moore. Kenneth Moore, are you still with us? If you're out in the hallway somewhere, make your way back. We're going to move forward. Let's call Ms. Katherine Williams, if you're with us here tonight. All right. I see signs of life in the back. And as she makes her way here, we're going to have Cindy Weatherby after this, and Christine Atkins will be a resource witness here with the Elections Division. Texas Secretary of State is our final witness. It's registered. So if you would please, ma'am, state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
Sorry, it was upside down. My name is Katherine Williams, and I'm here to support myself. I'm retired. I enthusiastically support HB 32. Voters who believe themselves to be too disabled to stand in line to vote should have every courtesy extended to them. Sometimes disabilities are not physically obvious, and a voter should not have to provide information that is protected legally about themselves. I myself have a condition that would make it hard for me to stand in a very long line. I could not have voted in person in the last general election, except thanks to past legislatures and my age, I was able to cast my vote from my home safely and securely. I also have worked as an election clerk in a highly crowded precinct in an upscale neighborhood, and find many people who wait in long lines and have been in tears when they got close enough so that election workers could see them and find the problems that they were having and help them to the front of the line. My mother died from Alzheimer's. When I was their caretaker, I could not have safely brought her into the polls with me or left her alone in the car. The same thing would be true for mothers and children, especially small children in car seats. If you have twins who are 18 or 20 months old, it's going to make it very darn hard to get out in the amount of time that you have, wait in lines. And I have seen lines in the 2020 election that were 4 hours long. So I think it's a very logical and caring solution that you provided. And I think that there are, with all due respect, ma'am, far more mothers who in these days are working 2 and 3 jobs to support their families and cannot afford the time to go to the grocery store, go to the polls, and vote. We shouldn't have to choose between being caretakers of our families and caretakers of democracy. This bill just doesn't reflect common sense. It shows common decency. I urge you to pass it.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Members, questions? Chair recognizes Mr. Fierro.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Ms. Williams, thank you very much for the support in this bill, but I'm beginning to see some common ground here. People who oppose the bill like me. People who support it don't like me. Thank you, Ms. Thank you, Ms.
I like you just fine.
Thank you. At this time, the chair calls Ms. Cindy Weatherby. And with that, members, we will be calling upon Christina Atkins as a resource witness, if we so desire. Ms. Atkins, if you could please state your name. I'm sorry, Ms. Weatherby. I looked at the wrong line there. My apologies. If you please state your name for the record, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
I am Cindy Weatherby, and I am testifying as a member and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas in support of House Bill 32. And we don't have friends on the left or the right. We have all of you as someone we respect, and we come to you as total nonpartisans. We looked at this bill as being helpful to those people who have children who may need protection from being inside. Given the situation of the pandemic that we were in, or still are in, there are individuals who have children who can't come inside the polling place, and this would allow them to protect those individuals while they vote, and who don't have the opportunity for child care. And I think that's about the only thing that hasn't been said tonight, is that we do look at protecting those children. I will say that one of the people who helped us look at this bill was a longtime election official and may have experienced a different situation. You know, we have many different counties and many different polling places, and children have been disruptive in other places. Maybe they just didn't have the magic touch, but of our former speaker, who was the clerk or elections administrator. So it was mentioned that children can be a distraction, but the main reason we're supporting this bill is to protect the child in the car with the voter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Weatherby, I think you just brought up a great point I hadn't thought about. You talked about the pandemic, but it could go beyond that, could it not, when you think about maybe you're a single parent with a medically fragile child.
Exactly.
And so I think your testimony just made me like Art's bill even more, Representative Fierro's bill even more, whether I like him or not. So.
Oh, come on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busey. Thank you. Members, other questions? Chair seeing none. At this time, members, Christina Atkins, the Legal Director, Elections Division, Texas Secretary of State, is available as a resource witness. Members, do we care to have Ms. Atkins testify?
Mr. Chair, I can ask you from here, do you like me or not?
Ms. Atkins, you do not have to answer that question. All right, thank you. Are there any other individuals here who would care to testify on, for, or against House Bill 32? Anyone else who is registered to testify who's not been called, given the opportunity to testify? Chair seeing none. I would ask Representative Fierro and recognize you to close on the bill. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Busey.
Oh, just a question.
Oh, you were just, I'm sorry. Mr. Fierro, before you close, I think Mr. Busey has a question.
Oh,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Fierro, I want to say my wife likes to watch us while we do these committees, and she just texted me her experience this week. Early voting's going on right now. I was here probably 15-hour days this week, and she had our 1-year-old during a pandemic and did not want to take her in. Now, she did because she was able to, and that was the choice. But this would have helped her significantly and our daughter during a pandemic to stay in the car if this had been an option. So I hope we get this bill through. So, because it's, despite some of the really negative testimony we heard attacking, single parents and people struggling here, I think that's just one more example where this bill would be helpful to all Texans. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
And Mr. Fierro, do you care to close?
Chairman Clardy, thank you very much for the opportunity to lay out House Bill 32. I thank you again, members, for your favorable consideration, and I close.
Thank you. And the chair would note that as much as we like having Representative Busey here, we would much rather see Molly in the room. So do we have our next? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, thank you. Thank you, Representative Fierro. If no objection, the committee substitute will be withdrawn. The bill will be left pending. Is there objection to withdrawal of the committee substitute? Chair hearing none, the committee substitute withdrawn. The bill is left pending. This time, the chair lays out Senate Bill 598 and recognizes the House sponsor, Representative Jatan, to explain the bill.
All right. Thank you, Chairman and members. I'm here to lay out Senate Bill 598 relating to auditable voting systems. This is a bill designed to ensure the integrity of our election results by backing up our electronic systems with a voter verifiable paper trail. Paper trails provide a layer of security and redundancy, providing an opportunity for an audit if needed. Senate Bill 598 does the following. It requires the Secretary of State to conduct a pilot program of the risk limiting audit beginning November 8th, 2022. It establishes allowances for poll watchers to observe audits. It establishes that after September 1st, 2026, all voting systems must be auditable. It establishes methods by which the counties can get refunds for upgrading recent voting systems to comply with this bill. It prohibits, after September 1st, 2026, voting systems that from being capable of connecting to an internet or external communication network, and it prohibits the Secretary of State from waiving any requirements of SB 598. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, Texas is one of only 13 states without statutory requirement for voting machines to have paper trail. States like California, New York, Connecticut, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, New Jersey, and even District of Columbia all have laws requiring paper trails. Senate Bill 598 was voted unanimously out of the Senate. It also specifies that the bill will not go into effect if the required funds are not appropriated. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I reserve the right to close.
Thank you, Representative Jatan. Any questions, members? Hearing none, and you do reserve the right to close. So with no further question, we will proceed to testimony. And at this time, the chair will call Mr. Bill Sargent to come testify, and following that, we'll go with Mr. Chad Ennis. Mr. Sargent, you still with us tonight? All right. Well, I think he may be. He'll make his way back in. Mr. Chad Ennis, are you with us tonight? I don't see Mr. Ennis. Members, we do have Christina Atkins and Mr. Keith Ingram of the Secretary of State's office registered to testify. Members, do we want a resource witness to testify concerning this bill? In a very shocking way, Mr. Busey has indicated an interest in taking questions from the Secretary of State's office. So at this time, Mr. Keith Ingram, would you please come to the stand and provide your name, position on the bill, and who you represent?
My name is Keith Ingram. I'm the Director of the Elections Division at the Texas Secretary of State's office, and we're here on SB 598.
Mr. Beatty, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like hearing from the experts. Mr. Ingram, this seems like a fairly good bill to me. I do have a few questions, though. Do you have the bill with you?
I do.
Okay. Section 1 on page 3, line 17 and 18, I have it pulled up right here. It says the Secretary of State may not waive any requirements of this subchapter. Can you elaborate? I mean, I guess my only concern is, does that mean that if something arises, I'm trying to understand if that's going to hinder you doing your job as y'all do this audit, as you do the practice audit. Are you worried about that at all? Do we need to clean that up, or that won't
Worried about that at all. Our office does not waive, cannot waive, and will not waive state law.
So it's just set in here for, okay. Other states have introduced risk-limiting audits and have included a pilot program to refine them, which this does. Do the timelines in this bill allow for enough time for this to be implemented properly, in y'all's opinion? Will the timeline work out here? Because I'm not trying to hinder what we're trying to do here, just trying to figure out if it's feasible or if we need to think that through.
I'm glad they gave us until 26. It is going to be a difficult chore to implement risk-limiting audits in Texas. Our voting systems are varied from county to county, and it's going to require some thought and preparation. I think we can probably get it done by then. That is an aggressive timeline. Colorado, who pioneered this, it took them 6 years. And their system is not nearly as complex as ours.
Okay. So they took longer, though. I guess one of the things I'm just thinking about the cost of doing this. Will this be any issue with getting this done from county to county financially? And is there money to help? We've talked about, I know on many of these bills, when it comes to our machines, we talked about federal funds. Maybe there's other funds. Is money available if we need to do something there?
So a small part of the fiscal note on this is one employee for our office just dedicated to this project. We think that's what it would cost us. The audible voting system refunds, obviously, is the big part of the fiscal note.
Okay. That's all I have. I mean, I think in general, it's a good idea what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, members. Yes, Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ingram, I have a couple of concerns, and hopefully you can assuage them. One is there anything in our law, or do we need to put something in, that would prevent any machine that kicks out one paper ballot from kicking out a second receipt for the voter to take with them? And the reason I'm concerned about that is it's actually been proposed many times over the last 20 years since I started working on this issue, and I don't want a voter to have to go out in the parking lot and show the boss that he voted the right way, or his dad loses his job at the fire department.
So the auditable voting systems that we have in Texas that we've certified, the paper is the vote, and it goes into the scanner, and there's not a second.
And there's no way to
print another one? No, sir.
Okay. The second thing is, okay, so we have I was going to say precinct, but I live in a county that doesn't have them anymore. But we have a voting location that has 200 voters today. And then we go to count the backup paper ballots, and there are 270 in there. How do we prevent that? How physically do we prevent that from happening so that we know that the backup's an actual backup? And I've heard of this happening in other places. I've never heard of it happening here, but we don't do much of this.
You know, there's a number of safeguards in place, and obviously you've got a polling location with bipartisan representation within it.
Not to get 24-hour voting. Some people have to go to sleep at some point.
And so you've got, those kind of safeguards. You would have to have, the judge's signature on all the blank ballot stock so that you wouldn't have fraudulent ballots in there. That would be a very, very difficult problem, and I would think that problem, obviously, if they're following their plan, their central count plan and their precinct plan, they would know that problem at the end of the evening and treat that ballot box separately.
And at best, you'd have lost your ability to use the paper as a backup, because there's no way even 201 ballots are capable to back up 200 votes.
Well,
you wouldn't know which one was which.
That's the thing, and what you would have is 201 that were scanned and 200 check-ins, so you'd have to reconcile that in some kind of way. be a difficult process. You know, if it's 1 or 2, maybe, but if it's 70, we'd have a serious problem.
I want to make sure as we move on down the road that we aren't, that in attempting to use a security measure by having a paper backup, that we're not introducing additional problems. And anytime you've got physical paper, I mean, Lyndon Johnson knew how to cheat with paper ballots.
So
we haven't gotten any dumber since then.
A more common problem, one that we've already experienced in the return to paper ballot trail systems, is that ballots get misplaced, and so you have fewer votes than you should have, and that's been a problem in several elections, most notably in Midland ISD bond election. It was a serious problem. There were about 800 missing votes.
And yeah, 800's a lot.
They found them, but it was a chain of custody issue, and it was just human error, but that's a more serious issue than extra votes.
I mean, obviously you couldn't match them up by having, you know, a number in the machine that recognized this is voter number 14 and a paper ballot that recognizes number 14. Otherwise, the guy's lost his
You actually
ballot.
can do that because the ballots have individual numbering, and you've got a scan of the ballots, and that was going to be in Midland if we had to. That was going to be the last resort, is to actually match up ballot image with the ballot paper and see which ones were missing.
But at that point, doesn't the voter basically lose his secret ballot? We know number 14.
No, because we don't know who those voters are. It's just a serial number on the paper stock, either software generated or pre-printed, but it's a unique number to that ballot.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schofield. Members, other questions? Chair recognizes
Yes, I
Representative
do
Swanson.
have, thank you, questions also. One of them is definitely I had concerns about as we talked in detail once about that whole Midland ISD bond thing, and when one entire box was missing and everyone knew it was missing, then you know, you ordered them to go ahead and certify the election, and then it was up to
Certify the recount. That was.
Yes, by then you'd had a recount. This is true. And so you knew, everybody knew they were missing. And so then you told me you had to tell them to certify them, because otherwise they couldn't all go sue each other, basically, because we don't have a method for fixing that problem other than people who have deep pockets and can afford to go sue. So that's my first question. Is there something that could be put into law so it doesn't require people who know they've been wronged to have the expense of a lawsuit?
There's not currently anything in law other than an election contest, and the only way to have an election contest is to have an election at which to shoot. And so you have to certify the results before you have an official election result that you can contest. That's just the procedure that we have in law now. I don't know if there's a way to have this done before the canvass to have confidence in the result of the election. You know, to a 95% degree. That's what risk limiting audits do, or if this is something.
Right. And I realize that you said that's the current law. I guess I'm hoping that by now you've come up with some brilliant idea for how we could fix that problem. It does concern me that we would just have, in large counties, just warehouses full of these just cardboard boxes that would be these paper ballots. And, you know, what's to keep somebody from making entire boxes from certain areas that they didn't like disappear, and then what do you do?
Right. Whenever I had a visit for a Council of State Governments meeting in Las Vegas, and we went to Clark County's election, and they've got a similar system where they've got a paper record of the vote as well as digital records of the vote. So it's a true DRE with a tape machine next to it, and they keep those adding machine tapes under very strict lock and key, even within their warehouse, which is already strictly controlled. That is a very serious issue that would need to be addressed locally in their warehouse to make sure that the paper ballot records, because that's your record of your election, and that's the most important. That's your crown jewels. You're going to have to make sure that you've got those in a very safe place.
I agree. You know, they often like to call this paper ballot backup, but as you and I know, it's not. It is the election, because if they don't agree, the paper rules.
That's right.
So therefore, do you feel that we have enough safeguards in place that these things cannot just have a whole box disappear, that kind of thing.
Right, we do on the chain of custody for election records that we've had in place for a long time. I mean, the election code is based on paper ballots. That's the foundational basis of the election code is old-fashioned, hand-marked, hand-tallied paper ballots. And so those election security procedures predate electronic voting equipment.
Okay, and we did talk about how these machines are capable of reprinting the missing ballots, but you talked about how since we have countywide voting in a county like Houston, Harris County, we don't know where those people voted, and so you would have to print out whatever it is, 1.5 million, whatever we had, ballots and try to figure out like which ones were missing on that particular race. And if you had multiple challenges going on, then you'd need those paper ballots over here, and then you'd have to reshuffle and use those paper ballots over here to check in this other race. And it could be a nightmare in really large counties. So what do you propose to solve that problem?
So that problem would only exist if you've got, like Midland ISD, some missing ballots and you'd have to match them up. One would certainly hope that would be a very rare occurrence because it would be a nightmare to have to do.
Do we need something that says within, if a certain percentage, like of the difference of any race is missing, that there's some automatic recount?
Well, that's the advantage of having a risk limiting audit instead of the partial manual count that we have now, is the risk limiting audit, if it's done properly, gives you a certain confidence level in the result of the election. So instead of testing the machines like our count does, our count makes sure the machines tabulated the votes correctly, which is an important thing to do. But what a risk limiting audit does, if it's done properly, is it says that you have a 95% confidence that the result of the election is correct. You know, and if you want your confidence level to be higher, you're going to have to hand count more ballots. If you want it to be lower, you count fewer hand ballots. But you know, that's what this does, so that you don't have to have ballot for ballot accuracy. You can have a statistical confidence.
Okay. And what about, you testified to and informed us not long ago that there's a certain type of ES&S machine that cannot tell that it's already voted the same ballot, and you can just put through the same paper ballot over and over again. How can that be fixed? Like, or would those counties, I believe we put that in one of our bills that that's going to be a requirement. What is that going to take to fix that?
Like I was telling Representative Schofield, if you've got an issue like that where you've got, in this case, more votes in the scanner than you have in the box, then that's a pretty easy problem to fix because you still have that same unique serial number on those ballots. And so you can see that that one ballot was run each time. You'd have a picture of it every time.
Okay. One last thing is, I do have people who tell me that because of the way the timing works on the e-poll books, that you absolutely can match it up to a particular paper ballot, and someone with the county, somebody who had access to all those paper ballots would be able to tell who voted how, because they absolutely can tell exactly.
I disagree
with the e-poll books.
The only way that would even be conceivably possible is if you had one check-in station and one voting machine.
Or what about a really slow day and nobody else checked in anywhere close to that time?
Yeah, that would be a very difficult thing to try to unravel on the back end. We have ballot secrecy.
You don't think in like an ESD race or something with a slow turnout that they'd be able to figure that out and they'd lose their secret ballot?
I don't think so. Not if the like I said, unless the ESD race is the only race on the ballot, they've got one check-in station, one polling machine, and one scanner, and one voter at a time, then that's conceivable. But
okay,
that'd be about the only situation where I could see it even being possible.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Members, other questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony, sir. Yeah. At this time, I'm going to yield the gavel back to our honorable chairman.
Chair now calls Bill Sargent.
Bill Sargent, former Chief Deputy Clerk for Elections, Galveston County. Testifying for myself is shown on your registration that I am voting, I am testifying in opposition. I want to change that to testifying on.
Okay, so we have your permission to change that? Just
Yes,
a
you
moment.
do.
On, neutral, yes. Okay, we now have you being shown as on. Please proceed.
Okay. I oppose this legislation in the Senate. Under Section 2 of the bill, it says that anybody who has a non-paper trail DRE in their county uses that equipment has to convert it to a paper backup type of system. Secretary of State has told me that there are no federal funds available to do that, and there are no state funds available to do that. This could cost the county of Galveston alone almost $4 million. That's a big hit to take, and it's about what it cost them in the first place to get the equipment. But this bill does have one saving grace, and that is in Section 4, it states that the Secretary of State is only required, that language is important, only required to implement this if the legislature appropriates the money. I would personally feel better if the language said that the Secretary of State shall not do it, as opposed to is only required to, which means the only required language is saying that it's permissive, that they don't have to do it, but they could, as opposed to they shall not, which means you're not going to do it unless the money is there. When I testified in front of the Senate in the last session, I said to the State Affairs Committee, I said, you know, I estimate the cost of this statewide is going to be about $150 million. Senator Hughes said, oh no, you got that wrong. It's going to be closer to about $200 million. Now we got it down to 40 or something or whatever. So I'm questioning where those figures are coming from. But the bottom line is, like Mr. Schofield has said on numerous occasions, you got to pay for what you do, as opposed to having an unfunded mandate for the different counties. That's my testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair now calls Laura Presley.
Hello, Chair Kane and members. Dr. Laura Presley speaking.
How about this? I got you down as Laura Presley here on behalf of True Texas Elections, LLC, and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'd like to speak on a section of this bill that has not been brought up yet and has to do with regard to the network connections and the wireless technology. I want to draw your attention to the poll books. The poll books are connected to the internet, and the question is, are the poll books part of the voting system? Let me read to you the definition of the voting system. It's section 127.003. Voting system means a method of casting and processing votes. Method of casting and processing votes. Let's look a little bit at the e-poll book software. The software code, to my knowledge, is not actually reviewed by the Secretary of State's office. I don't know that they have any reports on what the code says for the software for the e-poll books. Let me walk you through a little bit of what the e-poll books do. They store and access the voter ID. They check through internet access down to the county about the voter ID. Is this the person I want to check in? The software of the poll book randomly selects a ballot ID that's an alpha number from its software. The software of the poll book stores that ballot ID so it's not used again. That software of the poll book that's connected to the internet accesses the voter ID and correlates that voter ID with that ballot style. The software of the poll book that's connected to the internet takes the ballot style and records that ballot style in two ways. As an alpha information, it records what the ballot is, and it records it as a barcode. That barcode is accessed by the ballot marking device. And I'm going to give you an example of the ES&S tool, which I have poll watched multiple polling locations and I've been a voter in. That access code is the barcode. You cannot vote without that barcode. To correlate that with the HART voting system, anybody on here, and I know Representative Swanson has been an election judge, that barcode is now your access code to get into the system, and you can't vote without it. It looks to me like there's an argument that the e-poll books now have crossed over from a check-in device to part of the voting system that defines the ballot and the access to the ballot marking device, and it's read by the system. We say that the Secretary of State does not waive law, but at this point it looks like the e-poll books are part of the voting system as defined currently. The poll books should not be crossing over into the voting system capabilities where they are today.
Okay.
So I want to raise that as an issue. And
Thank you, Dr. Presley. Members, any questions?
any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair now calls Marcia Strickler. Hi, ma'am. Good evening. I've got you as Marcia Strickler here on behalf of Wilco, We the People, and yourself, and you're for this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So when I read this bill, auditable voting systems and risk limiting audit, I just heard Keith Ingram talk about instead of a manual audit, which our county has 3 precincts of early voting and 3 precincts of election day voting that they select randomly. Why just a statewide and not a county-wide audit? Why limit it to statewide? We currently, right now, our Williamson County is in need right now for a county-wide audit for a sheriff race due to witness irregularities by many with sworn affidavits. Our election administrator has smugly told many concerned citizens and voters that requested an audit of our 2020 general election that our Texas election code has not put anything in place that allows a voter or a witness to submit a contest or request an audit. I am for this bill. I think it's very important, but I do think that there should be some additions to open it up to not just statewide, that it should be considered for countywide as well. In Section 127, Secretary of State shall select the precincts to be counted. What precincts? How many precincts? How is that determined, and how many precincts would it be? So those kinds of things I question in this bill, but I am for it. I think it's a good idea because our election administrator says that we need something like this in order for citizens like us to request an audit. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Members, any questions? Thank you, ma'am. Chair now calls Robert Green. Howdy, sir. Got you down as Robert L. Green here on behalf of the Travis County Republican Party Election Integrity Committee and yourself, and it shows you testifying on this bill, neutral. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. I really only had one comment with regard to the bill. It sounds pretty good. I just wonder why we are waiting until elections after August 31st, 2026, and that would be a question for the bill sponsor. Why are we waiting this long? I mean, auditing elections is important. If we're gonna give public confidence to the accuracy and transparency of the election, we should be able to audit the election, any election that especially that might be close and what have you, at the request of a candidate, et cetera.
Excellent.
All right.
You might be able to get that question answered from Senator Colcourt's office. Thank you. Members, any questions?
Well, with the person who laid it out.
Well, he's carrying the House for them.
Thank you.
The author may know better. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, last call. Dan Chandler here, present. Okay. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 598? If not, the chair recognizes Representative Jeton to close on the bill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to lay out this bill. To address a couple things that were noted, the fiscal note is a There was a rider filed on the Senate side to make sure that was funded, and if it's not funded, then it won't go into effect. And then as far as the time frame goes, I think it was as the Secretary of State had mentioned, it's going to take some time to make sure that we get that right, and the audit process and the whole process for doing the audit is going to take some time to narrow down. So if there's no other questions, I ask for a favorable consideration on this bill and close.
Thank you. Members, any questions? None. Thank you, Representative Jeton. If there's no objection, the bill would be left pending. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the bill is left pending. Okay, members, we're going to now move on to Senate Bill 1340. So do that. Chair lays out Senate Bill 1340. I'm the House sponsor on this bill. I'll now accept the bill. So we've heard a lot of concerns on it. This is something that, thankfully, we have this committee process for. So make some corrections and see if we can do this right. So, since federal courts have dictated the states must allow citizens registered to vote when obtaining or renewing their driver's licenses, which we call motor voter, Senate Bill 1340 will codify and establish a process for electronic voter registration on motor voter registration. Members, we've discussed another bill that I have that's on motor voter, and hopefully maybe we can bring this into alignment. I've heard from Representative Busey and some others, and working from the Secretary of State's office and a few people about how to properly draft this, but here we are with we don't have a sub drafted yet that would probably fix some of these things and really align it with the law as is. But this time I'm opening up to any questions from the members, or we can move on to witnesses and hear from people about their concerns.
Do you have the House bill number for this?
It's just a Senate bill.
Oh, it's just a Senate bill. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Representative Beckley, we had a House bill that was strictly for motor voter. We're working on some of that sub-language still to get it done. Theoretically, we would probably bring that into this, where it's about that only. Yeah. Members, any other questions? Okay, if not, we will proceed to testimony. David Carter, the chair calls David Carter. Yes, I've got one of those, Colonel. All right, I've got you as Colonel David Carter here on behalf of yourself, and you were for this bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Please proceed.
I think the bill deserves to be passed to the floor because it's the only bill that I've found this session of the legislature that addresses verification of citizenship. It's something I've been working on since the previous session, 2019. And I think that the process of requiring proof of citizenship to register has been raised in other states. I think this handout, and you all had emails from last night also, the process has been held up in the courts in 3 different circuit courts of appeal, U.S. federal. And on the other hand, within our own 5th district, that's headquartered in New Orleans, we have a good track record with them in our voter ID law, which was about 10 years ago, of getting court sanction or court approval with our language in the bill. And so we're safe using that process. There's a safety valve called the Statement of Reasonable Impediment, a declaration of reasonable impediment. And what I would suggest, in order to make this bill bulletproof in the courts, is that we lift the language from Section 63 of our election code pertaining to a person presenting themselves at the polling place to vote. We're safe there with the courts and with no hint of disenfranchisement or keeping somebody from voting. If that language is pulled, similar language, and put into Section 13, as in the handout there, you would have a bulletproof bill, I think. And you simply take, you change election judge to registrar, you change polling place to registrar's office, and you change voter to applicant. And I think you've got this thing tied up in a nice, neat bow tie or bow ribbon. That's my suggestion to make a good bill, hopefully withstand being shot down within a year or so by lawsuits.
Yes, thank you, David Carter. Thank you. Members? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Colonel. Chair now calls Katherine Williams. Okay. Chair now calls Dan Chandler. Oh. Is that Katherine Williams coming? Okay. All right, I got you down as Katherine Williams here on behalf of yourself, and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, we couldn't hear you. You may have to pull that microphone down a little bit as well. There we go.
Give me one moment here. I'm sorry. My name is Kathy Williams.
Yeah, I was asking that question. You said that was true.
That's true.
So it's okay. You can
I'm
proceed.
here to represent myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm opposed to the bill. I'm a little bit confused with the information that you just presented. I'm not sure about what's been added or stricken from this.
Nothing's changed, ma'am, from the way it was filed. Okay. We're here to hear from y'all and other folks in order to make it a better bill.
Okay. I'm here to oppose the passage of HB 1340 out of this committee. This bill continues the session-long attack on enfranchisement and county election workers, taking away authority of local officials who, with few exceptions, are competent and in their duties, and according to the Secretary of State, did an excellent job despite heavy odds in the 2020 election cycle. Not only does HB 1340 take away elections operations authority from county leaders who know the communities that voted them into office, it provides no added value that I can see. And it puts a political appointee in control over election processes, potentially involving the person who appointed them. The bill itself and the author during his layout of the bill have provided no convincing evidence that a problem exists. Vague statements, little if any proof. HB 1340 makes the Secretary of State the Chief Voter Registrar of Texas and would put all county officials, even elected ones, under SOS authority. Despite this being a problem, a solution in search of a problem, it comes with a heavy price tag. The Legislative Budget Board estimates this bill would cost more than $18 million the first year and nearly and a little less than $18 million every year after that to propose. That's in the fiscal notes from the LBB. Why? Why would we spend that kind of money and give up that much local control for no benefit? I urge you to vote against HB 1340.
Any members, any questions for the witness? Thank you. Turnout calls Diana Chambliss. All right, I got you. As Diana Chambliss, you're here on behalf of yourself and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
Right.
Please proceed.
So my name is Dee Chambliss, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself. I support this bill. I was a little confused also as if you're going to merge this bill with another bill. But either way, this year I was made aware of some inconsistencies due to the motor voter registration process. And in this bill analysis, it flat out states there's no process to verify citizenship of voter registration applicants. So that was another concern that I had. We've all, or most everybody in here, has been to the DMV, and we see the difficult job that they have. So when we're having to ask them to, I don't know how they verify citizenship, so I haven't really felt very secure about how, people can register to vote with their motor voter. I just support establishing a hardline process to check the citizenship of the applicants, and I find it hard to believe that maybe there isn't one in place now. Is that true?
We could bring up the Secretary of State.
Okay, I'll ask him.
Thanks.
But either way, I like the idea of verification across multiple tried and true databases to ensure that citizenship is checked for a motor voter. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any questions for this witness? No? Thanks so much. All right. We now have 18 witnesses remaining. Just a reminder, this is our last bill. Turnout calls Glenn Maxey.
Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party, registered in opposition to the current bill. A number of witnesses tonight will talk about some of the problematic things in Senate Bill 1340. I want to talk about two suggestions to make it a better bill. In the motor voter piece, as we're working through that, these bills are written in the process that's there under the court order now, allows somebody who's registering for the first time, renewing their license, or changing their address to be registered to vote automatically. And that's leaving out a lot of people in Texas who are already registered, already have a driver's license or a state ID. Their citizenship has been verified. And so we could simply allow those people to enter the portal at DPS and register to vote online. And save the state a lot of money in processing paper applications as those people are left. I think of the, I believe that we're still at several millions of people who have driver's licenses that are citizens who are not registered to vote. And it would be the most secure way for those people to actually just go online and use this system. So I don't see why we don't go ahead and just do that too, and let everybody who's already with the driver's license. The second piece is in Section 21, there's the suggestion that the state of Texas do a comparison of our voter registration rules with the national change of address. I think everybody's familiar with that, the U.S. Post Office. The parties and other entities have already been doing this kind of work of bouncing the voter registration rule against the NCOA. Can I finish this little piece? Yes, sir. And coming back, you get a list of those voters who have a different address from their voter registration address. This bill suggests that those people who are out of county be sent a confirmation letter. Well, if we look at the section of the law where the confirmation letters are, it says that we send that letter to the voter registration address. Well, duh. We already know that that address is a bad address. So we know that all those people, it's an affordable thing, but forwarding of addresses is only 6 months. We're going to be doing this probably at a bigger interval. So we are wasting a lot of money. Now, if that person is not going to get that confirmation letter, they're going to be put on a suspense list. I would suggest that the alternative is what we do is we send the confirmation letter to their new address. And if the people don't respond and re-register in 30 days with their new address, which will take them off the old county list, then they go on suspense. In other words, send it to where they're going to actually get it, can register, and if they don't respond, then you put them on suspense to get them off the list. Those are my two suggestions.
That makes sense.
It'll be
Thank you, members. Any questions?
Fix them.
I think Representative Busey probably supports your points. You're just looking tired at this moment. Thank you, guys. We all are.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Okay, just a reminder: if you feel like you've heard someone else say what you were going to say, and you can still submit things today. By the way, on the website for this committee, you can do public comments as well, or you can just let us know you're passing. The chair now calls Robert Green. Howdy, sir. I've got you as Robert L. Green, Travis County Republican Party Election Integrity Committee, and yourself. That's who you're here on behalf of, and you're for this bill. Is that true?
That is correct. The points that I was going to make have already been mentioned, so just record me as being in favor of this, and I'll pass them.
Thank you, sir. Good night. Great. Okay. Chair now calls Stephen Lance. Okay, Mr. Lance, if you're nearby.
I believe Stephen Lance is with the NAACP LDF, and he submitted written testimony earlier.
Chair now calls Emily Eby. Did I say it wrong? Tell me how to say it.
No, you got it.
Okay.
It's great.
Emily Eby, here on behalf of the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I show that you are here in opposition to this bill. Is that correct?
You got it.
Please proceed.
I am testifying against SB 1340, particularly the provisions that enshrine voter purges based on bad information. Section 2 of this bill requires the use of DPS data to throw suspected non-citizens off of voter rolls. But recent Texas history teaches us that requiring the Secretary of State to verify voter rolls with DPS citizenship data is a recipe for disaster. In 2019, Acting Secretary of State David Whitley used DPS data to question the citizenship of 95,000 registered Texas voters. Within days, 25,000 of those names were stricken from the list. A federal court soon invalidated the rest. Instead of more secure voter rolls, Texas ended up with 3 federal lawsuits, no Secretary of State, and a bill for $450,000 in attorney's fees. SB 1340 shares DNA with that purge. It would require the Secretary of State to remove voters based on a strong match, though we know that even a so-called strong match can be incorrect. It would require counties to take action against voters who are weak matches, although those are extremely likely to be wrong. To my knowledge, there's been no significant improvement in the DPS citizenship data in the last 2 years. Section 2 of this bill risks repeating our state's own recent, expensive, egregious mistakes. Additionally, Section 44 of the bill seems to suggest that DPS would have to provide one's driver's license application for would have to provide one driver's license application for citizens and a different one for non-citizens. This change may seem innocuous, but it would impose an additional burden on DPS as well as an additional expense. This change is also superfluous since the current form already asks if the applicant is a U.S. citizen before offering them voter registration. SB 1340 also places a huge burden on already burdened county voter registrars, which would disenfranchise a number of voters. It also, as you've acknowledged, violates the NVRA, by my count, at least twice, but it sounds like that's under control. For these reasons, we'd ask you to oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? The chair recognizes Representative Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Eby, one of the things I'm really concerned about, you mentioned, and it's tied to, seems like we're getting back into the practice that we've already found by the courts to not want to do, to which ended up purging voters, and then ultimately, I think you highlighted it really well, costing us fees, losing, Secretary of State losing job, I mean, just a downfall from the decisions made. How can we fix that here? What do we need to change?
I mean, there's got to be a way to verify voter rolls without using these purge methods that we've used before. I'm not an expert. I don't know what will work, but we all know what doesn't work for sure. And it does seem like a lot of these bills coming through are already have a litigation price tag for the state. And as a taxpayer and one of the litigators, I am tired of funneling that money back into myself.
Sure. Let me ask you, there's like 51 sections of this bill. You were trying to get your testimony into 3 minutes. You have another section.
Yeah, that James Slattery you can thank for that one, I think.
Is he here today?
No, he's not, but he's here in spirit.
I just didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to hit on.
Yeah, I think the county voter registrars, the provision that requires, or that would say your application is effective 30 days from when it is processed rather than 30 days from when you submit it. We all know that everybody does things at the last minute, and a lot of times people will file a bunch of voter registration applications right at the last minute, and it will take a county, even the best, like the swiftest, most efficient counties, it takes a couple of days to process because we do those all by.
We understand that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, great. I think another thing would be that one of the NVRA violations is that by not kicking that, if the voter registration deadline's on a weekend or holiday, it doesn't kick it to the next business day. It would effectively kick it to the previous business day because those applications won't be processed, and that would violate the NVRA requirement that it not be any more than 30 days out from the election.
All right.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Chair now calls Ryan Cox.
Ryan.
Thanks so much. Chair now calls Jen Ramos. Good evening. Got you down as Jen Ramos here on behalf of the Texas Democratic Party and yourself. And you are not for this bill, is that correct?
That is correct.
Go ahead.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Jen Ramos. I currently serve as the State Democratic Executive Committee woman for Senate District 21 with the Texas Democratic Party. I am speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 1340. Today, I'm testifying not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of my grandparents who were failed by the system by attempts to verify citizenship. My grandparents, Sylvia and Pedro Rodriguez, are decorated veterans who served our country in Korea and Vietnam as members of the Army. They were recognized by Congressman John Carter for their service. My grandparents also happen to be staunch Republicans who have never missed an election. This has made for interesting Thanksgivings, to say the least. In 2019, I received a call from my grandmother because she had received a letter from DPS stating that she had to prove her citizenship in order to remain a registered voter, something she had never experienced in her life. Here's the plot twist. While her last name is Rodriguez, she's actually a white woman, born just outside of Ithaca, New York. David Whitley's attempt to update the voter rolls resulted in confusion for one of the very voters who elected the governor who put him there in the first place. She tried calling DPS to get clarification on documentation, and was found that she had to submit paperwork to prove her citizenship. At the age of 75, she no longer had access to hard copies of her birth certificate. She and my grandpa are both disabled vets who in non-pandemic times already can't stand and wait for extended periods of time at DPS. Before they could figure out what was going on, David Whitley rescinded his attempt to purge the voter rolls. To this day, they are still confused as to why this was required, and as a result, they call their Democratic granddaughter for questions on voting. This bill would require people to prove their citizenship to vote by either requiring they submit their own documentation or come in person to provide documentation, as is the case with the U.S. passport in this bill, creating an undue burden on voters from engaging in their constitutional right to vote. Voters, like my grandparents, who have served their country and done everything by the book. This type of legislation is counterproductive. I urge the committee to vote against this bill, and am open to questions.
Thank you, members. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Turnout calls David Weinberg. All right, got you down as David Weinberg, Voting Rights Advisor for the Brennan Center for Justice, and you're against this bill, is that correct?
That is all correct.
Please go.
So let me start off by saying that no flawed voter purge is a good voter purge. And I want to be fair. I'm going to talk, as some others have done, about some things that have happened in Texas. But it's not just Texas. In 2016, the People's Republic of Brooklyn, New York, took 200,000 people off the rolls incorrectly. That was a very bad voter purge out of Brooklyn, New York. But I want to go back to the sort of the whole premise of this bill. First of all, do we have a problem with the counties doing voter registration and maintaining our voter rolls? That we need this, in this bill, this costly and new expanded bureaucracy in Austin to be doing the job instead? I would say there's, first of all, no evidence to support that we really have a widespread problem. And two, the Brennan Center did a study which showed that in the last decade, 14 of the 20 largest urban counties in Texas were increasing their purges. So it's not like we're not purging voters in the county. We are. So that's sort of being the foundation of this bill. We sort of question the premises of it, and then additional issues of, you know, in this bill, like we've seen with some other bills, some Betancourt legislation, this threatening county registrars with fiscal penalties if they don't do the job correctly seems to be not the best policy, also counterintuitive. And also, we're looking at a bill that has currently 1 or 2 or 3, who knows, NVRA violations. All of those things considered, we would urge the committee not to support this legislation. Thank you.
Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you. Chair, I'll call Steph Gomez. Welcome back. Get you Steph Gomez here on behalf of Common Cause Texas. Shows.
Steph Gomez, yep.
Are you for the bill?
I am definitely opposing the bill.
Okay. May I correct your witness?
Oh, did I do it wrong?
I mean, I was kind of surprised. That's why I paused. So we have your permission to show you against the bill. Is that correct?
You have my
please give us just
enthusiastic permission to please put down that I am opposing the bill.
It now says you're against this bill. Is that correct?
I am against the bill. Yeah. So, howdy, I'm Steph Gomez, obviously tired, here with Common Cause Texas, in opposition to Senate Bill 1340, and while there are many problems with the bill, I literally can't get into all of them, so I'm going to keep my comments pretty general. Voting is the bedrock of our democracy. We should be encouraging every eligible Texas voter to do so, not create additional and unnecessary obstacles. Senate Bill 1340 is directly opposed to the values of Texas's democracy. This bill cannot be amended to rectify the harm it would cost Texas voters. It must be thrown out in its entirety. Despite years of evidence demonstrating that widespread non-citizen voting is not an issue in our state, this bill creates a complex multi-step process for verifying an individual's citizenship status and gives the Secretary of State broad discretion to reject an individual's voter registration application if the person does not present documentary proof of citizenship from a list of acceptable identification documents. Bills using the same discriminatory tactic to target naturalized voters has come up in states across the country only to be rejected time and time again, notably in Arizona in 2013, Kansas in 2015, Georgia in 2018. Allowing this bill to become law would cost the people of Texas a ridiculous amount of taxpayer dollars in legal costs when we already know that the issue will lose in court. There is no doubt that the proof of citizenship requirement laid out in SB 1340 constitutes a severe burden that would prevent many from registering to vote and cannot be outweighed by the state's interest in preventing the non-supported and widely partisan claim of widespread voter fraud. Further, states that have attempted to put in place documentary proof of citizenship laws have been met with resistance from impacted voters and civic engagement groups. We should be working with voters. You should all oppose this racist mess of a bill, Senate Bill 1340.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you. Chair now calls Wendy Woodland. Wendy Woodland. Chair now calls Cindy Weatherby. Pitch down here is Cindy Weatherby. You're on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas and yourself, and you are for this bill. Is that correct?
I am not for this bill. I am against
Yeah, you're against this bill. That's what it says. It's that late.
But
You could change your mind, though, but I understand.
I could, but I will make this short because I think I heard you say that you're already thinking about changing the thing that I'm going to talk about.
Go for it.
All right. Well, I think that probably by now, in the 3 times I've been in the Capitol this year, you all know that the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, a grassroots civic organization that encourages informed and active participation in voting and in participating in their government. We love living our mission, which is empowering voters and defending democracy. And we mean all voters, regardless of party, affiliation, or any other way to differentiate eligible voters. And we feel this bill provides roadblocks to both parts of that mission. SB 1340 provisions make voter registration more complicated, slower, less transparent, and less convenient for voters. And it calls for using citizenship data that you've already heard about that's been proven flawed previously. It creates uncertainty about voter registration effective dates, and that was the issue that I was going to spend my 2 minutes talking about, which I believe someone else mentioned, and you said is
100%.
Something that's going to be dealt with.
Yes.
The uncertainty of knowing when you are actually eligible to vote after having registered is a big problem, and we certainly appreciate your consideration of fixing that.
Yes, ma'am.
So for that and other reasons, we were urging you to not approve Senate Bill 1340.
Understood.
Appreciate your consideration.
Glad you're here to testify against the bill, I guess. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Members, thank you. The chair now calls Joanne Richards. Joanne Richards. Susanna Carranza. Oh, was that Joanne Richards coming up? No. Okay. All right, Susanna Carranza.
This is my twin.
Awesome. Got you down here. Susanna Carranza, you're here on behalf of yourself and you're against this bill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Well, I actually testify against this bill when it went to Senate, so my testimony is going to be similar, but you guys haven't heard that one. Texas, as we all said, is really usually at the bottom in voter turnout, and a huge part of it is because our voter registration process is so freaking difficult. This bill makes it even harder. There are a lot of provisions that make so, but I'm focusing on 2 of them. And even though a lot of people talked about them, I think they're so important that I'm going to talk about them again. The first one is the 30 days. And I want to just point out to a different aspect of the 30 days, the approves of 30 days. The issue is not only that it provides uncertainty, is that it gives like absolutely no time frame whatsoever. So when you say that you're going to fix that, I really hope that you fix by completely striking and going back to the effective date is 30 days from when the voter filled the application, because any other variation of this is still not going to cut it. The second part that I'm going to talk about, because that's personal to me, is the use of DPS data. I am a naturalized citizen, as you might have heard by my accent that I wasn't really born here. And the one thing that happened to me personally is that when I became a citizen, I was already a Texas resident for a long time, so I already had a driver's license. And since I didn't move for a long time, I didn't have to do anything to my driver's license that would update it to have my citizenship information. So had that purge happened like 18 years ago or however many years ago when I became a citizen, I would have been purged. So putting this back on the bill, something that has been litigated, it's not only a waste of taxpayer money, it makes me, it feels like an attack to people like me that chose this country by becoming citizens. So I urge you to oppose this bill. There's many, many awful things in this bill, but those two stand out. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. Members, any questions? Thank you, Ms. Carranza.
Okay.
Chair calls Darcy Caballero. Caballero.
Good try.
Gotcha. CWS. I've got you down as Darcy Caballero here on behalf of the Texas Democratic Party and yourself, and you're against this bill.
Correct. Good evening, members. My name is Darcy Caballero, and I'm here representing the Texas Democratic Party. And like you said, I'm testifying against SB 1340. From 2020 to now, I've been the TDP's Voter Protection Hotline Director, where we've received over 30,000 calls throughout the election of 2020. And if there's one thing that I know about, it's definitely voter experience. Take it from me, my entire job is to anticipate the hurdles voters will face when it comes to voting. I was going to spend some time talking about the 30-day provision, but like Susanna said, I hope that it being changed means that it will be stricken entirely given how ill-conceived the provision is. But what I can guarantee is that one of the most harmful provisions out of all 34 pages is that this bill is that if a voter does not have a Texas driver's license or a state ID, so say an elderly person who no longer drives, they will have to go through a multi-step proof of citizenship process. This process requires the voter to present either a passport, which many cannot afford, a birth certificate, which many cannot find, or citizenship papers, which those of us born in the United States don't even have. If none of these three documents are presented, the application then must be rejected. If other states are any indication, this could prevent over 10% of Texas's new registrants from being registered to vote. In my experience, voters currently have difficulty even knowing how to register to vote, let alone the multi-step process they may have to go through if they don't have a DPS ID. This, in conjunction with the former unclear effective date, could unnecessarily elongate the process entirely and make it really difficult for voters to know when they could even cast their ballot, especially those that submit the registration near the deadline. Furthermore, additional but unspecified voter registration authority would be centralized within the Secretary of State's office, removing the autonomy of county election officials from parts of this process. The vague nature of this provision means that the Secretary of State's office is able to pick and choose instead of the legislature designating which areas that they'll be in charge of. It is for these reasons that I urge you to put voters first and vote no on this bill.
Thank you. Members, any questions for this witness? Thanks so much. Okay, last call for Dan Chandler. Fatima Menendez. Chair calls Fatima Menendez. There we are. Howdy, ma'am. Fatima Menendez, here on behalf of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and you are against this bill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Please proceed.
Chairman Kane and members of the committee, my name is Fatima Menendez. I'm an attorney with MALDEF. MALDEF opposes Senate Bill 1340. My testimony will focus on specific provisions, but we oppose the bill in its entirety. Section 2 requires the Secretary of State to use the DHS database of non-citizens living in Texas to identify, for cancellation purposes, non-U.S. citizens registered to vote. However, there are a few common data points between DHS records and the Texas voter roll, and any reliance on weak matches, such as name and date of birth, will result in properly registered voters receiving citizenship challenge letters that infringe on their right to vote. The next part of Section 2 was also mentioned earlier, but I want to reference it because I want to make sure that Senator or Representative Busey's question gets answered. Section 2 also requires DPS to forward to the Secretary of State the file of a person who applies for a driver's license or state ID and provides on the application form that he or she is not a U.S. citizen. Without language limiting citizenship challenges to registered voters who indicated to DPS that they were not U.S. citizens after the date of voter registration, this bill codifies the unconstitutional voter purge of naturalized U.S. citizens in Texas in 2019, which I will not get into because you already heard a lot about that. Section 3 designates the Secretary of State as the chief voter registrar and authorizes the Secretary of State to maintain the voter roll and serve as the final arbiter of the eligibility of voter registrants. The Secretary of State is also empowered to take over any duties and functions of county voter registrars. Section 3 radically changes the structure of election administration in Texas, in which county registrars determine the eligibility of voter registration applicants, maintain the voter rolls, and cancel the registration of ineligible voters. Local officials are better equipped to carry out these duties due to resources and staff. Section 6 establishes an online voter registration process that only processes applications that can be matched to DPS records. Newly naturalized U.S. citizens who have already been issued a state ID who tried to register to vote will be automatically rejected for processing when DPS finds their permanent resident cards in past records, which I also want to say that legal permanent residents do receive real ID compliant driver's licenses, which was misstated earlier by Christina Atkins with the Secretary of State. The applicant would then be notified of an incomplete application and advised to correct and resubmit. There is no process in place for them to be able to correct and resubmit their application. This section includes a lot of poor drafting. It also mentions that a person would be flagged when they are applying for their original driver's license, but then it says that the person would be required to provide the audit number of their already issued driver's license. So it's impossible for a person to be able to apply for their original driver's license and submit information from their driver's license they were already issued. There are several other sections that I include in my written testimony, and I expand on the provisions that I already included. Thank you for your time.
Members?
Yeah.
Chair recognizes Representative Busey.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Menendez, just going back to Section 2, you talked on it. How can we fix this? This keeps coming back. So let's say if we can't kill the bill, how can we fix this so it won't remove someone who has become a citizen but filled out the form? What does the language need to say?
The language specifically in Section 2 could be fixed by limiting it to voters who registered to vote. Let me make sure that I say this correctly. Voters who indicated to DPS that they are non-U.S. citizens after they registered to vote. Yeah. So you need to make sure that that language would be included in Section 2. However, that would not fix the entire bill. Sure. There are still several provisions in here that target and naturalize U.S. citizens.
No, I agree.
So you're saying there's a chance? Support.
No, definitely not.
No, I'm with you. I just, that has been coming up in multiple bills we're hearing, so I just want to make sure we're continuing to talk about the fix on that specific clause among all the other things in here, so thank you.
Sure. The issue is that when a person becomes a naturalized citizen, oftentimes when they were a green card holder, a legal permanent resident, they applied for their driver's license, received their driver's license, then they become a naturalized citizen, they naturalize, then they registered to vote. The issue is if they then went back to DPS after they had registered to vote and indicated non-U.S. citizenship. Those are the only people that should be flagged after the settlement that was reached in the Texas voter purge litigation in 2019.
That's what led to all those people being removed inaccurately.
Correct.
Right, yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Should I call is Jonathan White? Look, he was here. I just felt like he needed to come up. I saw him in the audience, and he was here the whole time.
We should have excused him like 6 hours ago.
It's not my fault. Mr. White, if you could please tell us who you are and why you're here, or what you do.
Jonathan White, Election Fraud Division or section of the Attorney General's office.
And you're testifying on this bill, is that correct?
On the bill.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Chief White?
I feel like we should hear something.
Mr. White, please go home to your family. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I felt like you've been here sitting. You just, I had to call you up at some point.
Chance to stand up and stretch my legs, say hello to my wife, Sarah.
Good.
She's probably in bed, so.
Oh, bed, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but Representative Clardy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to give a shout out to the lovely Sarah at home, hoping that she's watching you and knowing that you've been sitting here minding your P's and Q's, and you could be doing ever so many other things. And I want to apologize to you on behalf of the state of Texas that we wasted your valuable time when you could be out investigating and building cases and taking them to court where they ought to be. But instead, you've been sitting in a green chair with a bunch of white paper hanging over half of them, doing absolutely nothing. And for that, I do sincerely apologize.
Thank you, Representative Clardy. And my wife will appreciate that. I was in committee during her birthday last time when we went late, and she was in bed by the time I got home, so I didn't see her all day. So she will very much appreciate the shout out. Thank you.
And I'll say this, you are among if I got 2 hands, cut off a couple fingers, You're on my short list of very favorite public servants who actually honor the state of Texas.
Thank you so much. I am happy to answer any questions about the bill if you guys have.
Oh, no, just blame the Senate for you being here.
All right.
It's not us, it's them.
All right.
So much.
Thank you, committee.
Great. Now, Representative Busey, or anyone else? Yes? Who would you like? They're both here. Oh, you don't? Okay. The chair now calls Keith Ingram.
He's top 10 too, for the record. This is your top 5.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Keith Ingram, Director of the Elections Division, Texas Secretary of State's Office, here on SB 1340.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ingram, just a few. I'm going to get through some of these. Section 2 would add a new requirement. I think it's twice a year, if I remember looking at the bill correctly. He just stole some of my notes. But to cross-reference the list with the Department of Homeland Security, how will this conflict with Eric and what we're doing right now? Will it conflict? How will this impact best practices around our list maintenance?
There's actually no list for us to use from Department of Homeland Security. It doesn't exist. It wouldn't change anything.
So it won't be hard to check that list twice. Okay. Every 6 months. All right.
There's the SAVE database, but the SAVE database is not a searchable database that you match with. You have to have an ID number to go look anybody up. And the ID number that we would have is exactly what DPS has. So there's nothing to check.
Yeah. We've talked about it over and over. So quickly, 2019, it seems to me that a lot of people got removed because they had said before they registered to vote.
Nobody was removed.
All right. Let me just say this. If we cleaned up that section about looking at this data post your registration date, would that clean up the issue of potentially flagging people that before?
I agree. That would implement the settlement agreement that we've got in place already.
Okay. I'm looking at towards the very end, section 49, if you have it. And if we need a reference, I can bring it up. But it just slices a whole bunch of things out of the code. And I'm looking at 18.0121. So would this allow a private individual? I'm just trying to understand what that does. 18.0, section 49, it slashes 18.0121. Do you have that reference? I had it up.
I'm not sure what that one is. It's in the part of the code that has to do with list of registered voters, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's the contract to investigate voter eligibility. A list of potentially ineligible voters produced for a county by a private business entity may not be made available to the public. Are you slicing it? Or otherwise used by the registrar unless the registrar has verified the accuracy of the information on the list through available public records. I'm just trying to understand what that means. And is that going to allow people to claim which and remove voters at will?
I have no idea. As far as I know, I've never looked at that section in 9.5 years in this job.
All right. Well, I'm just wondering why it showed up in here. If the chairman hadn't put this bill on the calendar, we wouldn't still be here. No, I appreciate it. I heard what he said about me over here. So. I have more, but we'll go. I think we're in agreement. If we haven't seen this section, we don't know why it's in here. Let's cut it out of this bill. Thank you.
It's probably a good idea. Thank you, Representative Busey. Members, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Please go home. Thanks so much. Everyone else. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 1340? If not, I will close on the bill.
We got a hand wave.
What is your name?
Valerie DeBille? Should be signed up one way or the other.
Well, signing. I don't have you signed up to testify. You might have submitted a statement or not to speak. Okay, great. Okay. Thanks so much. So if there's no one else here who wishes to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 1340, I close on the bill. Is there objection? And if there is no objection, the bill would be left pending. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the bill is left pending. Members, that concludes today's agenda. Is there any further business for the committee to address? If not, the chair moves to adjourn. Is there objection? Hearing none, the House Committee on Elections stands adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.